Well, we have Scott Jones coming very soon. Maybe what we can do in the meantime is quickly introduce ourselves and where we're from. Welcome everybody to USBE for the NESS Workgroup. I'll start. I'm Dale Frost. I'm the Fiscal Policy Analyst here at USBE, and I'm really excited to get to know you all. You want to go this way?
Sure. Scott Rogers, Superintendent in Tooele County.
Emily Willis, I'm with the Legislative Fiscal Analyst Office. Ben Lishman has another meeting, so I'm an attempt at a replacement, but
You're not great.
Brett Balthazar, School Finance here at USBE.
Pat Gardner, I'm the one that's been sending out all those numerous emails, and my apologies. We hope we have a date for December.
Chad Lloyd, Severe.
Kerry Reese, Kane.
Bruce Williams, Garfield School District.
Todd Hubbard, Park City School District.
Karen McInnes, I'm with the Financial Operations, School Finance.
Ben Rasmussen here with USB to help with the rule writing.
I'm John Palmer. I'm here at USBE here in Financial Operations.
Jake Houtrow, I'm an MSP Administrator here at USBE.
Scott Jones, Deputy Superintendent of Operations at USBE. Thanks for being here. So we're ready to keep going? Yeah? Okay, good.
He's on the phone.
Oh, yes.
Oh, sorry.
Can those who are on the phone introduce themselves?
Dave Brotherson, Duchesne School District Superintendent.
D. Miles with Duchesne.
Great.
Okay, so obviously we started off with the work group member introductions, and we have the other participants. I did think Superintendent Shoemaker said he was going to be here, but
I've not seen him yet.
No, okay. So scroll down on the agenda on the screen, please. Or up, whatever that is. So then let's get right into it with the agenda items a little bit further. So the first one is we just want to make sure, has everybody had a chance to reorient to the report that Jamie gave to the legislature back in February? We made some specific recommendations. Okay. So those short-term recommendations, 1 through 4, and the long-term recommendation number 1. Then we had, which I think is good news, is number 3. From all indications, we didn't have any carry-forward balances this year, because one of the key pieces or problems we were trying to solve was that business administrators or whoever, superintendents, felt like, no, those balances would get distributed in the next year. It wasn't like we were, long term, but in the short term, now we feel like strongly that we've solved the problem. We'll get into the details of that here a little bit later. I think that's a good news story, so I just wanted to share that with you. So next up, then,
Scott, can I just interrupt you for a second? I know that in our last meeting, there were a couple of issues that the legislative fiscal analyst brought up, Ben brought up.
Yep.
I just wanted to see if you could, during this, refresh us on what the legislative fiscal analyst, because one of the issues was that very one you just went over, the carryover types of funding.
Yes,
so
if
you could, during the process, remind us.
And one of the other big ones is concern over the routes, which we'll get into, or I'm sorry, not the route, the length of the route, right? Which could have second or third level effects, unintended or otherwise. So we'll get to that as well. But we wanted to make sure, so to Bruce's question, we'll address those concerns as what we feel would be inevitable as part of the rule-making process, right? That we'll bring those back up and remind everybody. So thanks for that. So let's get within number 2 here, which was, the distribution of that good news story. So I'll turn it over to Dale for that, for an explanation behind that. We feel it's value added.
Great.
So you know how we did what we did.
And Pat, if you can send a digital copy, I sent this to you yesterday. I'm sending out paper copies. I'm just passing these along. these just have the details on the 2019 NESS distributions. And so for the folks from Duchesne, and if there's others, so they can see what we're looking at here, I'm bringing it up on the screen. So I'm coming into this, I've only been in this position since July, and so I really would appreciate feedback from the work group if I'm missing something, but I just wanted to report out to the group what were the distributions, and then if there was any questions on the amounts or calculations, we can circle back on that. But as Scott mentioned, there was no carry forward balance in 19 that was not distributed, and so of the $32.5 million, you can see here at the bottom of this that 600,000. So it was actually 33 million that was allocated because 650,000 or so was distributed, and that was the 18 balance, and the 924 was the unallocated amounts using the existing NESS regression formula. And so that was also distributed. So 33.1 was distributed out to the school districts this year. The following pages just have some of the detail on the calculations for the 18 unallocated amount and the 19 unallocated amount. And as far as I can understand, this has been in place for a while. It's just it takes into account the tax rate levels for the NESS school districts and prorates that. So if you're above average tax rates, you get a little more proportionately, and vice versa. Yes.
That was for 17 and 18, and in 19 it should have been allocated based on the same, just prorated based on what we received under the
fees.
Okay, so that's a great question because I don't.
That's how it should have been done, based on what we discussed with the finance committee of the state board and what went up to the legislature, and I think it was put into rule.
And I think number 3 that Superintendent Jones read, I think addressed this issue on Jamie's 3.
Yeah, so let me read what was in the report for 3, and then we can, because that's a great question.
Yeah,
So,
that's why we're doing this.
So 3 on that report to the subcommittee says revised carry forward distribution methodology to distribute any remaining funds from fiscal 2019 in the current fiscal year based on the number of WPUs generated for eligible NESS schools. And I think that's your point. Right, Bruce? This would occur before end 2019. Adoption would require changes to USB Rule 2777445. So that rule has not been amended, and there's still the requirement to take into account the tax rate. But that is a good point. We actually don't have that in the proposed amendments to the rule. So that's good to know that the taking into account tax rates was meant to be eliminated. Am I correct in that?
There's a draft number 1 that was passed out on the rule
Yes.
a year ago, and it has that language in it on page 4. It says the superintendent shall distribute any funding balance in the NESS program based on the number of WPU funds generated for eligible necessarily.
Why don't you come up to the table so you can get these and make sure that.
So it was actually, there was a proposal that was sent out. It was draft 1 dated November 1 of 2019.
Yeah.
And that has that language in it that is similar to number 3. I thought that they had gone ahead and approved this in a board meeting. But
So we're on the same page. You're talking about lines 88 and 89, Bruce?
Yes.
That
85 through
85 through 89?
It's not come before the board that I'm aware of. This was, it was December, before the board in December, right?
Right. No, okay. So what Ben's talking about. So Bruce, we did make these drafts, but because we did, but it's never gone before the board. Right.
Okay.
The first time the rule will go in front of the board is in the December meeting. We wanted to have these meetings with you so that we got back on track with, because of the attrition that we had. We want to get the rule in front of the board with all your input. And good thing though, I mean, Bruce brought up, where we were at in the past, right? So we're just getting back on track here with the intent of getting the rule in front of the board for the first time in December.
So if I'm understanding, Bruce, what you're saying, the change should include on line 88, striking out after current year using a formula that considers the tax effort of a local board of education. In addition. Because that's the existing language right now. This is the most up-to-date language, so the changes would strike that out.
So that's consistent with the item that was brought before that Jamie put together in her document under number 3. And I was under the impression, and I'm not sure, but I was under the impression that was going to be implemented during the funding for the 1920 year, and that's how the money was distributed.
The 18-19 year?
18-19.
Okay, yeah.
The final funding under 18-19.
So we do believe that, yes, in the sense that I honestly feel like the spreadsheets were updated, right? Or the calculations were updated. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to get to this. The follow-up with Jamie, though, is difficult or challenging. I mean, she's got a new job now, and so we're really trying to get, back in line with this to say, that's actually did actually occur. But then even more so, we want to basically, ensure that it's codified basically in rule so that it, everybody knows or can refer back to it and know how exactly we got to what right is, right? And we'll do it by rule.
So if I can, and again, I'm looking at this post kind of an autopsy approach, and as far as I can tell, one part of that recommendation was implemented, which was to get the distributions out for 19 in the current year. But the rule update to change the requirement, and one thing I need to look at is if that's in the statute as well, and I believe it is, that requirement. But let me check on that. To eliminate the requirement that the formula take into account tax rates, that I don't believe was included, and unfortunately can't speak as to why. We were just trying to report out that. So, and I don't know if there's any. I apologize for not knowing more of that piece.
Well, that's why we're having these meetings.
Exactly. So we'll look into that. So that's a great point on the intent of recommendation 3. And then any other questions on distributions in 19?
Does anyone need a copy of the draft rule?
Yes. Thank you, Pat. And in the meantime, I will look and verify with the statute, because one of the questions was, do we need a statutory change for this legislative session versus next, and what's the timeline? And so I will get an answer to that question.
I don't think it was statutory, as it wasn't, because back when Martell Munro, years ago, when we did the change that's there, it was done in the board rule to deal with the issue of any carryover funds. And so I don't think it's in statute, but it'll be wise to check.
Right. Well, that makes it a lot easier if it's just the rule change.
No,
I think we have to say that right now.
And our recommendation is that it not be codified so that
right.
we could have flexibility in the future if we find that this is not the best.
And to be clear, we're not saying that should be added into statute. We just need to see if that is also in statute and if that needs to be changed to align.
He's going to find that.
Great. Thank you, Todd. Because something in my mind says it is.
Pat got up and had to get you copies of the rule. So Pat's capturing all the action items that are coming out here. So we repeat that follow-up, Dale, so that she records it.
Yes.
And then next meeting we come back to you with status.
Okay, so I brought up the draft rule revisions to R277445 on lines 85 through 89. Those have to do with the distribution of remaining fund balances for the NESS program. in addition to these changes, to strike out the language after current year, which says using a formula that considers the tax effort of a local board of education, to strike that in addition to the changes that are there. Is that correct, Bruce and other members?
Yes.
Okay.
Which line is that down?
That's line 88
Todd, did you
and
wanna
89.
Say anything or
Strike the language
After current year.
after current year, okay.
I was looking up statute.
Okay, but look, 88 and 89, where it says that considers the tax efforts of a local board. We want to strike that.
Well, here's what it says in statute. So this is, where am I? This is 53F2304, Part 9. And Bruce is correct in that the state board may distribute a portion of these NESS monies according to a formula adopted by the state board that considers the tax effort of a local school board.
That's what I thought was in there. That's why.
So how it's considered, obviously, there's some latitude, but
Right.
it's in statute that has to be taken into account
So it needs to be kept in then.
in some fashion.
Well,
Maybe over 2%.
the fashion it is right now that says using a formula that considers the tax efforts. It says considers it.
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
So you weight it so that it has very little impact
Yeah.
on distribution.
Like
We'd like to see
0%.
That's what I would say. Put as little impact on as possible, because I don't think that's a good factor.
So does it matter if it's removed? Based on the statute, it probably matters a little bit.
I don't think you can strike it out.
That's what I'm saying.
It'll have to be
Unless you
modified.
modify the statute.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why I wanted to check on that, because I thought it was in both rule and statute. So one of the questions is how should the distribution methodology change without a statutory? We can strike that from rule, but there's still a statutory requirement. So what should that look like? And then we can recommend a statutory change to strike that as well from statute to align with that as a.
Just like Todd's saying, I mean, if you have to keep it in without messing with the code, weight it so that the tax effort is extremely minimal versus the WPU ratio.
And then it's immaterial.
Yeah.
should we use language like weight it, to be that specific?
If that's easier than changing the code.
I would say so.
Do we have to be specific about it?
No, all it says is you have to consider it.
Yeah, I don't think you do.
I don't know that you have to based on the language of the code.
So there are some people that would say, if we have the opportunity to be specific and say what the methodology would be, like the weighting, then do it in the rule. Because that way it stays in place. But fine. I mean, if you don't want to do it, we don't have to do it.
My recommendation is that you do spell it out to some.
I would say so too.
In rule, so that there's not change in the guard. You have new interpretations, and districts are caught off again because the change of guard came. Say, no, let's just call it what it is, put it in the rule, and then you can move forward.
I represent you guys. You decide.
You could put a minimal amount, like say 10%, 5%,
5%.
5%. No more than 5%, something like that. I like that.
Do we need to
Because it
make?
wouldn't have much of an impact on what we did with this last year.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I got my question answered at the end. So Ben, are you clear on what the proposed amendment is then?
So not exactly. So you
So
want to
let's
give a
get there.
specific weight there, or what are we proposing?
I think what we'd be looking at is on line 88, where it says the current year using a formula that considers tax effort. I think in there we would want to say something to the tune of,
But not more than.
but not more than 5% of the carryover funding.
Just the very end of the
Somewhere in there, but near the words, but something.
It depends on how you want to call it out, or you say not less than 85% based on the WQ distribution.
Or
And
95%.
so that we're not putting a lightning rod right on the word.
I like that.
Tax base.
That's a good
tax
That's a
effort.
great way
Flip
to
it
do it.
Right.
around.
So
not less than what?
95 or 90, yes, whatever
95%.
whatever number feels good.
Ben, is there any way you can put what you're doing up on the screen?
Yeah.
Do you want to
Do you want me to get off of that? Yeah, that would
Then we
work.
meet the statute.
Remember,
Doesn't have the worry impact that you guys were worried about.
I just don't know what watchdogs are up there to say that you're being consistent here.
Well,
I don't know who's left to follow.
Ben Leishman will look at this carefully, whatever it is. I assure you he will.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and the reason why we
and he'll
didn't
comment about it too.
No, that's fair.
Right.
well, so can I speak to that?
Not less than,
Because-
I'm saying not less than, something which means you could push it up to 90.
If you're giving consideration to it, it doesn't mean you're going to do it. It's just you're going to consider it.
Scott has a comment.
Right, because, you know, we're all experienced with this now, is that you're right, Superintendent Shoemaker's right. Ben's gonna speak to it, and I think what you mean by that is gonna advise the legislature.
He will.
He will. So that's what we're progressing towards, is by putting it in front of the board in December and getting this pretty much all done going into the session, we're all on the same page. Because Emily's here, and she's taking the notes, and she'll take it back. And my understanding is Ben's gonna be at the next meeting as well, right? So if he has concerns and considerations that we need to make, along that line, we'll be able to do so before it's on us, right? But I think we should still move ahead, make whatever amendments and changes you believe as the group, because you're the ones, you're the important ones, to make those changes and get it so that we up here can support you by way of the
That's a
rule.
good change.
Okay, so I've got
Okay,
Where
right.
have you got it? I can't read it very well.
So we're on.
Are you on the left, or are you on the right?
I'm on
It's
both.
both.
Oh, it's both, okay.
Yeah.
That's just showing.
Okay, that's as
I got it.
big as I can get it. Keep the whole page. So consider the tax effort of the local board of education, but not less than.
What if you do this? Ben? Go up before based and put where it says superintendent shall distribute any funding balance in the NESS program, and then before based with a minimum of 95% based on the number of WPU. So we're going to, what Todd's talking about is focusing on the WPU rather than not focusing on the
5% of
the 5%.
You don't need to add that generated for eligibleness. You don't need that.
I don't think so, because you're talking about NESS in here.
Because it's the NESS program.
Okay.
Let's look at that, because I think that's a good.
And the other recommended change is to strike the new language, generated for eligible necessary existence small schools. And that should be plural, but we don't need that? Is that?
I think we already had that lined out in this draft. Yeah.
Well, this is the draft that you should have.
Yeah, like he's got it lined out.
Well, no, the first idea was striking out this language, but since it's in statute, keeping that language, but just striking this new language, which is not necessary. Because unfortunately it's hard to see, but that language is in there.
What did you read it?
So with a minimum of 95% of the distribution based on the number of WPU funds generated for eligible necessarily existing small schools in the current year using a formula that considers the tax effort of the local board of education.
So you have to have a different.
Yeah, we gotta have some words.
So you have to have, so funds generated by the, I just lost myself, where am I?
For eligible necessary existing small schools.
With the remaining balance distributed on a tax effort basis, or you're going to have the 95% or a minimum
Or
of
you could
95
say
in the remaining. You don't know what it's going to be.
You could say the current year, and then you could say something about the formula would also use a
No, I think you go just like Todd's saying.
With a minimum of 95% of the distribution based on the number of WPU funds generated for eligible necessarily existing small schools, and the remaining
funds being distributed based on local tax effort.
A tax effort basis, or whatever right word fits there.
Yeah.
We're striking that old language and put in the remaining.
You don't even need it. You
Well, you
probably
get-
put it up in front
Yeah,
of
you'd get rid of.
after a year.
Well, but if you
Yeah.
strike it all out, it
Oh, yeah.
doesn't matter.
So strike out the rest of that.
So we do want in the current year.
Yeah.
Strike out everything after a year.
After a year.
Then strike out the rest of that.
Well, you're going to use some of the language.
Yeah, that I was going to try and use the last
Yeah,
part
yeah,
of that
yeah.
language because it's already there.
So that's okay.
Okay. So after the current year.
So between schools and in the current year, you're going to put schools
With the remainder.
with the remaining balance or the remaining funds
Distributed using.
Using a formula that considers the tax effort of a local board. So you could use that same language.
Yeah, you could
Exactly.
and then just throw. Now I don't know where in the current year needs to reside.
I think the current year actually goes before it. Schools in the current year with remaining funds distributed.
The funding, you want the distribution to take place
In the current year. I like
both
that.
of them.
I like it.
Okay, I see what you're saying, yeah.
That's the whole
Back to
point.
language we struck.
Get it distributed.
Maybe that's goes up farther.
And that was a big deal to get that done.
Yeah, but in the current year is not is.
That's
It
probably
needs a different.
Could it go up?
connector,
Could you go up to?
Because it looks like you're just going to distribute the remaining funds.
Could you go up to the second sentence and say NESS program in the current year with a? So it's saying the whole program. Second line where it says NESS program, put in the current year with a minimum of 95%, and then both of those would be modifying the current year.
Yeah, so line 85 after balance, add in the current year, right? The superintendent shall distribute any funding balances in the current year, or in the NESS program in the current year.
That's where I was getting.
Yeah, no, that makes more sense.
So we have two different current years. So the
Right.
first sentence is saying how do we measure to know how much money is available for this exercise that we want to have happen in the current year. And we want the distribution to also take place in the current year.
You're right.
You need to use current year WPUs and as well as distribute it in the current year. Is that
Yeah,
the?
I think the core is that we want it distributed in the current year, not to carry into a.
That's what was talked about.
Right.
When to distribute it. It was
So
the
we
when.
moved it around.
It was the
not
when
preserve
part that was
that.
important.
I still think though, if you say that the superintendent shall distribute any funding balance in the, you could say in the NESS program in the current year, that would be any funding that you had fund balance would be distributed during the current year.
So I would probably break that up into a couple.
You could go into it, yeah.
So it's a little less.
I think you need to do a little wordsmithing on it, but
Yeah.
if you have the idea, that's.
I mean, I think I have. Are we close on the second subparagraph there is what you want to look at with the remaining funds distributed using keep that old language?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
We say it 4 different ways. We might all get to the right understanding. Okay, I think that's really helpful feedback. If Scott, I think we've talked about distributions. I think do we want to continue talking about rule changes because we did have the APR piece on the agenda, but we can move that around.
No, I'll stick with the rule changes. Well, actually, we do need to talk about the APR because we could have effects on that.
Right.
Okay, so yeah, go.
Okay, so item number 3 is just a report out about the NESS, adding the NESS program in the annual program report from Brett Baltazar. And Brett just left, okay? About the APR. Well,
Yeah, so we did get the NESS program added to the APR, so it's ready to code revenue and expenditure in there.
Do you want to say your name?
Yeah, John Palmer, USB Financial Operations. It's like Brett just stepped back, so I'll let him take over.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jim.
On the APR, we did create a program code for those that receive NESS funding programs. If I remember right, it's 5220. After talking to some of the LEAs, it's what they've been able to do is track it by location within that program number, so we can get the accurate revenues and expenditures, and that they're actually tracking those expenditures at the location, so we know which school is getting those funds.
Brett, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
On that. There really is only one revenue code, and so I have not been tracking the revenue by location, because when we get our distributions, they don't come in by location. They're just one lump sum under 5220.
Yes, and then those that...
And then I have gone ahead and budgeted for expenditures based on the numbers that you've given us before by location.
Yeah, in my defense, sorry, I meant to say it was just the expenditures that are being tracked.
I just want to make sure, because if I'm doing, I've got to do something different, I got to change now.
The revenues do get all lumped together. Are there questions or concerns on that?
It's just one lump, not by location, even though it's determined.
Does everybody understand how they would be reporting the expenditure side of it? On the same page. Okay.
So that will show you how those particular dollars are being spent. And then part of the analysis was, are those incremental dollars necessary for a school? Are we going to be able to get closer to that comparative analysis?
With our per pupil expenditure that we have, we should be able to get a little closer and see what the actual expenditures are at each school, and we can pick out those NESS schools and compare them to the various schools within your district and or within the LEA. It'd be hard to compare a NESS school from one district to another, but it can be done. But the ability to view all of your schools in comparison to your NESS schools will be available.
The only challenge is, for example, at Garfield School District, we have one school of our 9 that are non-NESS. So it's almost impossible for you to do that analysis other than on that one elementary that is a non-NESS school, comparing that to the other elementaries. So just know you're going to have some challenges when you start doing those comparisons within districts where we have one middle school and we have 3 high schools and all 3 are NESS. And so, we can do some comparisons, and I do every year. And when I looked at it, it was closer than I thought it would be.
And now with the per pupil
for reverse discrimination,
with the per pupil expenditure for every school, I mean, you should be able to know, okay, these 9 schools are going to be high in their per pupil expenditure because they have less students and we're sending more money there because of the NESS funding. But then you should be able to look at another district, and it may not be similar, but you can try and find those that are similar to your schools and do that comparison. We don't have that option in our system right now to do comparisons between 2 different schools, but we will. I mean, that's something that we can look at.
And the state work rule still has the no supplant clause in it, correct? But we never, up until the time we were just starting this year, actually, we wouldn't have the ability to even look at that as far as whether it was supplanting or not supplanting until we get to the point where you're looking school by school comparing, correct?
Yes.
So that's what you're trying to accomplish to some degree.
Yeah, we're trying to get so we actually know what's happening at the school, and we can do those types of comparisons at that level.
No, that's it. I'm good.
Any other questions you guys have on it? Okay.
Okay. So really, by doing that, we've accomplished item number 4 on the recommendations as well.
Yes. So we are actually progressing on item recommendation 4 was to create the NESS program, the annual program report, and we just wanted to report out on that and see if there was any operational questions on how to use that piece of the chart of accounts. So moving on to item 4 of the agenda, Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy, is not here, but Ben can run us through the proposed changes, and other staff can answer any questions you may have. So again, we've already been talking about the proposed rule changes. These are really to put into effect short-term recommendations from the subcommittee reports 1, 2, and 3. And so we'll turn it over to you, Ben.
Okay, you just want me to go through the different lines and show them where we have changes?
Please.
Go over here so I can see what the line numbers are. So the first place we added was just in the definition section. The first thing we had to do was add a definition for maximum student capacity. We had some discussion about this, and I pointed them to the definition for maximum capacity that's just drawn from the open enrollment statutes, which has a formula in there, and so we've tentatively suggested that maximum student capacity would be the same as you use for open enrollment considerations there. That's the statute that's referring to.
Is it early enrollment, Ben, or is it open enrollment?
So it's defined as either early enrollment school capacity or maximum capacity. So I just put them both in there because if you look in the statute and you're looking for maximum capacity, you're not going to find it unless you go to E, because they're in alphabetical order. So I just included both of them in there. NESS, I just wanted to take a few of the references to and abbreviate them in the statute in the rule, and so that's why we have that definition there on line 21 there.
So we're going to use the maximum instead of the threshold. For that section, for the early open enrollment, there's 2 calculations. One is you establish a maximum that your school is open or closed based on your threshold calculation. Which is 90% or 40 less than the maximum.
Well, I had anticipated using maximum capacity. We could look at that.
Is that a problem? I mean, you're bringing it up. So what's the issue there? Besides, is it this or that?
What's the necessity of defining capacity?
So that's a good question. So short-term recommendation 1, this is the sentence where we were trying to, because it says the consolidation criteria would be simplified to mean the next closest school has reached maximum student capacity. Therefore, the next school cannot be consolidated further. And so we are trying to figure out how do we define maximum student capacity from this report.
Now, that's a big deal to you guys.
Yeah,
okay, so you better think through that real carefully.
And get comfortable with the open enrollment statutory language. How you calculate maximum capacity is horrendous.
I think
because it's based on institutional stations that your board authorizes. They set the class sizes for those instructional stations, and it's not a straight. The state doesn't get to tell you what your maximum is. It has a bunch of variables that have to do with your average class size and how many instructional stations you've identified in a facility. So it's just beware. It's not a very.
Well, he does that for Park City. That's why he's telling
me. I do it every year, and my numbers change every year based on what my board says. Oh, you're going to provide these programs in these instructional stations, and my number just changed. The building has not changed architecturally.
So,
but programming in the building.
The question I have is, in the past, we have been able to qualify schools because they would. There's no way with maximum capacity that we can move it. Does this mean if we include this, that Karen, you're going to be asking us to go through a maximum capacity analysis?
That's what he's asking
every 4 years to be able to say yes or no. We couldn't move the students from X school to Y school because there's not enough room in there. That's the question we have.
And to be clear, we were not trying to make a point as to how or what's the proper way. We just had the question, how is this defined? And is there a better definition? We were trying to find the most appropriate definition already existing.
Yeah.
You know, there wasn't
the most important question you guys are going to answer today. You guys.
What to do with consolidation.
So what do you think?
I mean, it's a big deal.
Yeah, and that's why we.
This number is very subjective.
Yeah, I think we gotta have time to go back and look at
I
it.
think we better.
And that's fine.
Better.
That's fine because we have the next meeting scheduled.
Right.
In the past, it's just been so clear, because if you have a school that it's 400 kids, and you got them, or 300 kids, you got to move them into this other one, it's clear you don't have room for it. I mean, that's not even, but if we're going to have to go through
Right.
some sort of a subjective demonstration of that, that's.
Well, I've done, I mean, on my application, I submit a spreadsheet that shows I've got Richfield High has a capacity of 700 kids. I got South Superior High that I can't move over there because it's another 425 kids. We're out, but I haven't defined maximum capacity.
Well, how did you get to the 700? How do you know that's?
Well, you take your staffing ratio of 25 kids to 1 times your classroom.
Okay, so there's one formula.
But that's mine.
That's that situation. You've got other situations like us. We've clearly got room at Wendover High to bring 5 o'clock kids in. That's an hour on the bus. Of course,
Well,
that's
different criteria.
That's one of the, I realize it's another part of the criteria. I'm just saying, so if you're talking specifically about, you qualified as a NESS school because of the consolidation issue, that's one way. But necessary existing schools exist for a variety of reasons other than just consolidation.
So these guys are saying, if I'm hearing them right, they need time to go back and look at that. It's fun to talk to others about it. I'm assuming they'll talk to others.
And when we get to the discussion about timeline, we wanted to give time for districts to go back and look at that. It's still an open-ended question on how to define that. And again, the context of this is the consolidation requirements only come into effect if the transportation requirements do not apply. And that's paragraph 3 of the rule. It's the size requirements, which have to apply for all NESS schools. And then if the transportation requirements apply, then you don't need to go to paragraph 3, but then there are opportunities under paragraph 3 if, for whatever reason, the transportation requirements do not apply. And so in the case of Wendover High, that would be a moot point. But that's why we really want to rely on you as experts on what's the most appropriate way to define that, so that there's some clarity on our end as well as on the district end.
Can you hear me now?
Do we have a comment on the phone? Yes.
We're not going to get away from doing what I'm doing anyway.
I mean, I've got.
Somebody's going to have to look at it.
So part of an architect tells me what the capacity of my building is, but they take however many classrooms they've designed in the building, and they put an average class size of 25 or 30 in it.
Yeah.
Well, my board wants to have class sizes of like 23. I can't use my architectural limit because it's nowhere close to how we actually use our schools. Now, is there room to put more kids in? Yeah, you can make that debate, but I don't have to.
Yeah, but
I don't want to get compelled to use some number.
Exactly. I don't think we want to get in a world where the state board is dictating our class sizes at the local level.
Because it's the direct factor of capacity.
Okay. D has a comment.
Oh, go ahead, Aaron.
Yes.
D.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Yes.
I just thought on that line 44. To clarify there that would be the combined enrollment of the next closest school. Combined enrollment of the 2 schools would exceed the capacity of the next closest school.
Hey, D, cut out a little bit. Try again. Over.
Okay. Just wondering on that line there, maybe we should say that it would be the combined enrollment of the next closest school within the district would exceed the maximum student capacity. So it's the enrollment of the 2 schools trying to fit into 1 school would not fit.
That's what I do on my spreadsheet.
Combined enrollment of the next closest school.
And that's what Chad said he did in his computation. And I really think we need more time to think about this language.
But I think he's just saying you want to put something in there that is say, you got to combine the two schools together.
To say that.
Todd, what was that language, though? It wasn't max capacity, what did you call it earlier?
Right.
Under the statute.
But
you
it's
said
clear,
there
the
was-
max capacity of the threshold.
Oh, the threshold.
Yeah, the thresholds that trigger, you actually have to make decisions. No.
So D is just saying, just add that language in there, but I think you guys, again, need to go talk to your people about that.
Well, that's max.
That
that's
probably
the other.
is.
He's adding something to it.
Right.
We're talking about the max student capacity.
Right, oh, I know that. He was.
Yeah, he's helping.
Yeah.
As determined
More
by
to it than just the next.
the max student capacity is going to be determined by the district and that threshold calculation, right?
Possibly.
That's
We're
how-
going to look
that's how
at
the
it.
open
That's what we
enrollment-
need.
They need to look at that.
We need
See.
to look at that. So you got to have Mark look at it too.
Okay, so, yeah, so let's wait on line 44 or 41 through 44. And so we will come back to how to define maximum student capacity. And so do you want to continue, Ben, before we get there and talk about the other changes before we get to lines 41 through 44?
So I think the next one we had was just on line 33 and 34, they had recommended that we strike the language over board approved bus routes in the travel calculations. So that would be the next change.
And the thinking behind this, we talked to our transportation specialist that there are not board-approved bus routes from, one's outside of a school's boundary to another school. So it doesn't actually apply. That these are not that they aren't board-approved bus routes in the sense that because it's outside of a school's boundary. So by striking
By the
it,
local board, not the state board.
right? So it's not
That's what you're saying.
Yeah, by it capitalized board approved, it's a different calculation that doesn't really apply to this. So it's much more about the distance requirements, and so it's just that was the only change there to clarify that. There's no other reason because they're just wanted to clarify that. And then go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, so the next change is just going on to 36 and on 38. The recommendation was to reduce the travel times for elementary and secondary. So you've got 35 minutes for kindergarten through grade 6 and 1 hour instead of 1 hour and 15 minutes for grades 7 through 12.
I can make my school in this school.
Can we go back before we move on to that next one? So on line 34 and 35, this language is troubling, and maybe it's always been in here, but I know we talked about this in the last meeting when Mr. Huntsman was here and Ben Leishman. But where it says for any student from the assigned school to the nearest school within the district, that's fine. But why does it say district of the same type? So are we trying to get into the game where you're saying we shouldn't be looking at busing them to a school within our own district, but to a school that might be closer, but in a neighboring district?
I think that
refers to school.
So maybe take of the same type and just move it near a school of the same type within the district.
I think that's what it's trying.
Is that if that's the intent?
If that's the point, then we do have approved bus routes within our district.
Right, but and that's the question. Do you have approved bus routes from one school outside of that school's boundaries to another school?
I see what you're saying. No.
Because it's from the resident of the student to the school.
But either way, we need to clean up this district of the same type.
Yeah. So the intent, it's my understanding, is school. So it's really school of the same type, not any school within the district. And so would it be clear if it was the nearest school of the same type within the district?
I should just say the nearest school within the district, period.
Well, I think the type is that you don't want to say,
Oh.
hey, I've got a secondary school.
You're talking middle school versus elementary school.
Yeah, that was what I was worried about right there.
Maybe say grade level configuration instead of type.
I would even the same grade level configuration.
With the same grades? How
Maybe I'm just reading that wrong altogether.
Yeah.
District of the same type is where I was.
But if we need to change what's
The nearest
beyond
school
this.
serving the same grades?
Within the district.
As it is.
Are we just clarifying for you, Chad, or are we making it?
I'm probably muddying in the water here.
Okay.
But this is the purpose to, if there are additional changes to this
I
rule.
don't know what happened. Oh, here, sorry. I don't know if that can be fixed. Yeah, it's hard to read anyway.
Right.
Ship my kids to Gunnison versus.
Mm-hmm. To the nearest school within the district at the same time.
Just kind of flickered out.
Yeah, I think it's just a
School within the district.
Yeah, school within the district means your district.
School to the nearest school within the district.
Consolidation across districts.
Like you wouldn't be required to send it to your, if that's
But
school.
maybe I should just say to the school, assigned school to the nearest school of the same type within the same district. Like, to me, that would read a lot better. But. So you'd put same type after school instead of after district. But.
I agree.
well, because that applies to the school and not the district. So if you put those closer together, it just makes it clearer.
And then, if we're done with that question, I have one more on line 34. And I don't want to rehash something that may have been settled, but I do have a real concern. From the, just what I'd like to comment on, from the assigned school. Okay, so we have a child that's already been bused an hour from, I'll just use Cedar Mountain in our area, down to Orderville, which is their assigned elementary. Okay, and then, yeah, maybe we could get on to Kanab, 20 miles in a half hour, so that student would have been on the bus an hour and a half at least. I wonder if this language in there from assigned school is going to really possibly hurt some NESS schools.
We talked about from the home.
I know we did, because you might have a student that's traveled an hour to get to the assigned school. So personally, I'm very concerned about that.
It's the language from the assigned school.
Mm-hmm.
We did talk about it being from the home, not the school.
From their home to the
Because then they
school.
would be on the bus longer than the time period, even though the portion that counts, according to the rule, is less than the time period.
Right.
But that was one of the reasons we reduced the time.
That's
Does that create difficulties though where you're doing a calculation for multiple students instead of just trying to calculate from the school, which is what it has right now?
But we also then reduced the number of the time
If you do it
on
from
A
home.
and B.
Yeah, because then you could technically have one student that would qualify that whole entire school.
And Park City would suddenly become eligible for NESS. Kids that are traveling longer than this time spent at home.
And there was
Let's go there then.
Yeah.
Let's add to the brief. You're going to get to the legislature. So how do they fix that, guys?
After that, we'll add some equalization money for you.
You can stick it right back. And we'll talk about the other.
How is it being handled now?
How's time handled, you guys?
Well, what was I know that Vernon came up because it's probably 45 minutes from Tooele, but is that 45 minutes as you drive it when there's a train coming across or traffic or weather or whatever
Application
versus
time
as Google, or as the crow flies kind of.
I think the first thing is let's find out what Karen's been doing. She's been going through the applications.
So I review, Karen McGinnis, I'm with the school finance team here. I've been going through the applications just to make sure that the materials are complete. In other words, based upon what you're qualifying for, the transportation, I just make sure that you've submitted some sort of supporting documentation to validate the time. So we usually get like Google Maps, to be quite honest. Or we will sometimes get the bus route information, the bus stops and the time involved with that from your transportation director. I'm sure that's where that comes from. So that's what I'm doing, is sort of just an overall, making sure all of the pieces have been submitted.
But then so bus routes would be from the student's house to the school, right? Because we wouldn't be submitting a bus route that would show from school A to the new school.
To answer that question, I think what I've seen is not from the student's residence, but more from the school.
It's from school A to school B.
So if I go to
Just a
Vernon,
generic
Tooele,
Google.
Google says you can make it in 30. But if you're stopping and picking up
Right.
students and
Then you have
stopping
to
at
add
Railroad, then
the
it's,
bus stops.
so you can't do
Right.
it in the time that Google says you can do it.
Yeah, in our case, we've used Google Maps, and if we don't meet it, which usually we go to step B, and the maximum consolidation is what's gonna qualify us.
That's where I'm at.
Where we're at.
If I could add, I just wanted to make a note that it's not a uniform standard type of data that we're receiving.
Right.
So we could get Google Maps, or we could get MapQuest or something, or we could get a bus route. So the idea behind standardizing whatever data we're collecting.
But challenge it. Am I just push back on that? Because
There's
it
no
may,
existing route.
right. I mean, in one case, Google Maps may show it, but then a realistic bus route from A to B would be above the time limits. Am I understanding that correctly?
Right, so you could go to Google Maps, and then you go in and say, we're gonna have to have these stops and this, it's gonna increase the time by approximately this amount of minutes.
We do serve by miles and minutes of our routes.
But there aren't any routes here.
But that's from the home to the school.
This is a new
This is something
hypothetical
new,
route.
because you'd be taking them from another school to this school, and so there is no bus route.
I know, but what I'm saying is you could run those just like you do miles and minutes and start at the far end of your district and pick that up and bring it to the school and then say, here's the minutes that it took. I mean,
But do we want to get into that kind of?
Maybe not, I don't know.
I think that's that's the justification for why we lowered the bar, so that we didn't have to nitpick on those couple minutes here, a couple minutes there.
I'm okay with moving on if the other people are, yeah.
That's a difficult issue. Go ahead, Ben.
I was going to say, so do we have any questions or concerns over the change in the time to that was the next one?
Yep.
So the next changes then come to the criteria that the superintendent uses to classify schools as NESS schools. And we've talked a little bit about that first paragraph on lines 42 through 45, roughly there, because I've made some changes in my own, if we've affected the line numbering yet. But now I had added, if you look up there, that language in blue, combined enrollment of next school to school. Do we want that or not want that in the draft at this point? That was the recommendation from, was it Duchesne?
Because it's the existing school plus the next school. It's not, that's because right now you have a combined enrollment of the next school within the district, but with what? With the existing school. I mean, is that implied?
You'll read that whole sentence that the superintendent may classify a school that meets the criteria as necessarily existent if the combined enrollment of the next closest school within the district exceeds maximum student capacity.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thanks.
Does that sound right, or?
Mm-hmm.
So
maybe I should say combined enrollment.
Of the two schools.
Go ahead, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Maybe I should say combined enrollment with the next closest school instead of.
And so just so I understand, it's not that you're in school A, school B is at 100%, but what you're saying is A plus B would be more than B's 100%. Is that what we're saying?
I think so.
As long as B is the school you're moving them to.
Right. That would be the next closest applicable school.
Okay. Right? There's
I don't know if this is going to create new.
Anything else there?
I don't know. I don't know.
Would that significantly increase the number of qualifying schools?
Well, the 35 minutes and the 60 minutes is what.
Right, and that was actually a question that we got from LFA, from Ben Leishman, about what would be the impacts of these, how many additional schools would qualify just under the transportation changes. But
help me understand, you guys, why you recommended from 45 to 35, from 45 to 60. So 60, yeah. Help me understand it so I understand it, you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, this goes to Bruce's earlier thing about bringing back up what the concerns were. So if we could go back that way, I agree.
Yeah.
I think we had a minute ago of saying, the student may be farther out, and so we were reducing the minutes that needed to be because the student could be farther out, so that they could have a drive to their current school and then have an additional 45
But this could have
minutes.
the opposite effect.
Well, we were also talking initially early when this group was formed, because I remember Natalie talking about it, that the intent wasn't to disqualify any current schools. We had a school that was in there that Google showed was, I can't remember if it was 41 or 42. But you can't do Vernon in 42 minutes. I've driven it, our buses drive it, but Google, if so it came back to that discussion. And then it started with, well, really, they're on the bus a lot longer than that, because if they're on the Tentic side of Vernon, they're not to the Vernon school to get transferred to Willow, which is the next closest school, which is 41 minutes. It wasn't 45. And I don't think we were the only one, because several districts brought that up, and that's where the discussion was. Well, then maybe we need to.
So 35, Scott, helps you in that circumstance.
Well, it keeps Vernon in there, because 45 technically on Google does not. It's like 41 or 42.
Is that how you check it? How's it checked?
Yeah, I think she's basically said they've done what the districts want to do in that.
Yeah, we accept a wide variety of supporting documentation on that is what, I was trying to allude to.
So Google is one way, but how is it checked?
But you could put in 41 and then say, but we got to have, during that 41-minute period, you got to have 3 bus stops.
And I think we're fine with that if that's honored,
but
if that becomes the reason to disqualify, then that wasn't the.
I hear your concern. I want to know how it's checked.
How would we even go about verifying if jump at 35 versus 45 to qualify? How many extra schools or?
But Ben Leishman, he will ask that question. A concern. I can tell you for sure he will ask that question.
I don't remember all the debate and why we ended up where we were, but I almost feel more comfortable sticking with the original language.
And Ben was here.
Yeah,
Ben
he
was
didn't
here.
jump up and down about it. He did ask.
Wright was here. No, he didn't jump up and down, but he said that's a question that'll get asked: is by changing this, does it add more to the program, or will it, or there's always potential. Will it? How do we know that?
That's my question. Right. I know it's going to get asked. It will get asked.
Maximum consolidations.
I heard Chad Wright saying, "Well, I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure how we should."
Yeah, what if it opens the door to 35 more schools?
If I said this was going to qualify a lot more schools, I would say don't go there.
I would too.
Well,
that's what I was saying. This may have the opposite effect of what you want.
Because you've already got.
I agree. I don't remember why we ended up where we're there.
Well, there were several districts that brought it. It wasn't just our district.
No, I understand what you're saying.
And it's fine to say that you
I
don't want
believe you.
additional schools until it's in your district, and then you would advocate for an additional school. So,
but
it's a
you've
little
been getting
disingenuous
qualified, right?
that way. What's that? I mean, you're talking about. We were only fighting for those districts that were already qualified. That if we rewrite the rule to disqualify, that would be a travesty.
I don't think that's
absolutely.
I think
I'm not saying it is, but if it ends up with the school dropping out, that would be.
So all I'm saying is keep it like it's always been. So if you've already been qualified based off of 45 minutes, why would that change?
Because every 4 years, you have to
Well, but you're already qualifying under probably something else. Most that are not doing the mileage are doing it under max consolidation. That's
I think
what
his
they
school
changed.
qualifies under mileage.
Well,
Not
his
his.
was, I think,
Mileage
his,
on that case.
I think yours might have been, there's another thing about the grace of the superintendent, basically. I mean, if
Right, it may have been
community considerations.
lots, and we talked about that initially, that there were a lot of additional things that make up why a NESS school is a NESS school.
Right.
I don't personally care if you change it back, but I would care if you just started dropping schools.
I don't think we want to drop anybody out. The committee didn't want to
Right.
do that at all.
And I'll just say from my perspective, and I was looking at this kind of similar to how LFA would look at it, is seeing these changes is the intent to add additional NESS schools.
You can see
And so, if so, I don't know if that's the intention, but would additional schools qualify under this? I asked around how we could even, if we had the data to do that, and it was very clear, no, that would have to come from districts to try to estimate. But the only time we'd really know is after the application period.
I think we're on some sketchy ground.
Speaking, I'm going to go back to an issue that I brought up last time. And the 4-year issue is an exercise in futility. So we actually have to do that every year. Because have you ever seen any NESS schools change?
No, I have not.
So what I proposed at that meeting is that we move to you're a NESS school once you qualify, unless you meet, you
grow out of it.
You're out of it because you grow out of it. You have too many students. But once you qualified, you're NESS. And then if you continue to grow and you exceed the capacity, the numbers that are up under rows 27 through 32, that's the only way you would not be a NESS school in the future. It would save a lot of work on our part and on the state board's part, but we've never had anybody that changed, so other than one that it would grow out.
What would be the trigger for that, though?
It's an ADM. Once you grow out once you exceed the ADM that's stipulated,
Karen would only be looking every year to see what the ADM of that school is. Once they hit that ADM maximum, they would go out of it. That might deal with this issue we're talking about, where people are trying to stay in the program by having minutes language changed there. Just a suggestion.
Can I ask just one clarifying question? If you had, let's say you had school A and school B was an hour away, and then you had some growth, in an area that necessitated a school 20 minutes away, so or a location, that would be the one case where that wouldn't apply, right? If you were qualifying under the transportation requirements, but then you no longer do. If you built a new school, let's say you had a new neighborhood or a new area that grew to where you had a new school, with that, where assuming that the ADM requirements are not met. So you have a new elementary school built there, both have 100 students, let's say. I'm not arguing with you. I'm just saying.
Basically, what you're saying is
you could have a building when you don't.
Well, and this is why I'm asking you folks, where you're like, we wouldn't. Is that a likely outcome?
So the only thing you're saying, though, is if you built a school in a place to keep your numbers such that you...
Oh, I'm not saying gaming it. I was just saying that...
we always have to look at is the school district game the system.
If you qualified under the transportation requirements, and then you no longer, for whatever reason, qualified under the transportation requirements, if there was a school district of the same type, a school within your district of the same type that was then built, is because in my mind, then both of those schools would no longer be NESS schools. Let's say it was 20 minutes apart or 15 minutes apart or something like that.
But that new school would have to be built in a way that would fit the new students because of the growth and the old students.
Well,
so now you're talking,
I'm assuming you're splitting the ADM
bonding capacity and decks.
Right, and that's I don't want to go there. I'm not saying we are.
Yeah, but I think what you're saying is if you come in and if you do build a school close enough to meet these time what would that do to NESS?
Right. And so if you only got out of it because of the growth of that school, I'm just wondering, was that the intent of the transportation requirements?
In my opinion, well, we also talk about Dugway High School, so it's about an hour from Tooele High School. But being out on the base, there are some different requirements there. I don't think, we could probably absorb the kids at Tooele High School, but it's a total different thing in terms of who lives on the base and who has access to the base.
How long they're there and
that kind of thing. So even though it's technically within, I think what we were trying to do was for a few of those, and I don't remember if we calculated statewide, but for a few of those that are right on the border currently, that if we soften these two up, that we wouldn't have an onslaught of new applications, but that we would still be able to qualify under time, because otherwise we're going to have to try. I think it would. I don't have the history of when they initially qualified, what the qualification type was. Was it on the good graces of the superintendent and they felt like they needed a school out on the base?
And that's why I made the suggestion I did is if they're NESS schools, they're going to stay NESS schools. They have. That's historically been the case. Why go through an exercise? It's been every 2 years, I think. Now we've got it to 4. Why do we do it again? Is there a need? Unless they're going to get larger. And in most cases, NESS schools are in very rural areas that are not growing anyway, if at all. If they're maybe declining.
I think so.
And so I just don't see that happening.
I'd just like to add a comment in addition to answer that question. Have I ever seen a NESS school application be denied? I have not. But I wanted to qualify that there's a difference between qualifying as a NESS school and being approved and whether or not what kind of funding you get. And I have seen where some approved NESS schools get 0. So I have seen that happen.
Is that because of the ADM?
Grow on the ADM.
So that would be a factor of the regression?
Yes.
Yeah, I ran.
Yeah, and that's.
I already ran the
that's perfect.
Year 21 NESS allocation using the old model, and there, sure enough, was one school that was approved but got no funding.
Well, we've got an elementary school in Kane that's just about to move out. I mean, we're just about out of it.
That's exactly how it should work. If you grow,
which I'm fine with, because you're getting more WPU, more normal. But when I say the good graces of the superintendent, like on line 56, I was thinking, C, line 56. And I'm thinking, that some communities that applies to, and that's a consideration. I mean, the school's always been there in Vernon or whatever, and
yeah, that 56 and 57 are
yeah.
huge.
So
They're huge.
let's talk about that, Scott. How feasible? I mean, yes, you could maybe absorb them into a high school, but for the community, what does it do for Dugway?
Yeah, it crushes that base, and it actually has a significant economic impact. Our kids actually, and the families that stay there, if they don't come to Dugway, they don't come because there's not a school on base, and they like a lot of those, since it's not armed services, they like a lot of those local services right on base that they can get. So if we didn't provide education there, of course, we were funded, that new school at Dugway was funded, 85% on a DOD grant. So, but they rely on that, the commander does, the soldiers that are out there to
see that classically fits this.
That would be a great.
What you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
Circumstance.
Social, cultural, and economic changes in that particular area.
And as long as we have that, I think if you go back to 45 minutes, I think we were putting that there as kind of a place card. I actually like what Bruce is saying. Once you qualify, it's not like, now if I built a school in Stockton, that's a different thing. But, the Vernon to Tooele is not going to change, and every year we go from 23 to 30 kids and back to 22 and 24 and 20. It's always going to be that way for the foreseeable future.
And I don't want to relitigate the 35 and 60, but it does beg the question, are we trying to qualify existing schools? And it sounds like that wasn't the intention of the work group. It was to make sure that existing schools qualify, but not trying to have additional schools.
Right, correct.
It wasn't trying to say these 10 schools, for a policy reason, maybe the kids are on buses too long, or but that's how I read that first.
That would be true. It was more of a grandfathering kind of a consideration than new schools.
Right.
But you can easily address that with something like
changing
this.
them back to
I think we need to
I
go
am
back to the
too. If
original.
we think there's a danger, we'll add new ones.
Todd?
The tricky part of NESS, all you qualify.
Well, I understand.
Grade math is different.
So do you see, is there a good reason to move it to 35 or to keep it where it was?
I think you've hit on the issue. Will someone fall out who's qualified today? There's a way to keep them in family. It doesn't matter what.
Yeah, the example of your high school, if Google Maps says 38 minutes, but there are 5 stops, it's a pretty easy thing to say.
You gotta get them through the gate.
Yeah, you're not going to pick them up at 50 miles an hour, and so it's Google Maps assumes following the speed limit all the time, and so that would be part of your documentation, and that's not that difficult to show.
You just get your transportation director involved and say how many stops would we have to have along this route, and how long is a standard stop. You can,
That's fine. I think the initial thinking when we first got together is what could we do to make it better? I don't think the intent was to bring new schools on, but what can we do to protect that funding? Because the bottom line is these type of schools, whether you're Dugway or Vernon or, require additional funding in order to fund them.
It's like Terry said, though, we might be hurting the funding, not helping it.
We might ought to just.
I think we need to go back to the 45,
Go back.
75.
And it wouldn't be appropriate to add some language in here somewhere that there's not an intent to disqualify any schools other than on ADM. I mean, would that be appropriate anywhere?
It's a rule, it probably wouldn't be.
That's a Ben question.
You could put that in the as a memo that you sent along with the rule to the board, just to explain to them what you're trying to do.
Okay.
But it probably wouldn't be. We don't generally put legislative intent. We would call that. We don't generally put that in the rule.
Okay.
Again, the intent of this I'll never forget Brad Lass looking at me and Lyle Hilliard looking at me and Scott Jones. They made it very clear the intent was to tie this down so that we didn't have to worry about, and Ben Leishman too, we didn't have to worry about
Additional funding.
we didn't have to. No, they're fine with additional funding.
No, the carryover.
It's not only the carryover. They want to make sure that nobody is gaming it. That's what they were worried about. Okay, so you guys, everybody here, that's what they were worried about, and so you can expect legislators when he stands up in front of that group and you're all sitting in the audience or maybe sitting there to testify as part of this conversation, you need to be able to defend 45 minutes or 35 minutes or whatever number you put in there, because Scott, because they'll ask, there will be, and guess where it will come from? It will come from the LFA and their staff saying, this was changed here, it was adjusted here. Am I right or wrong?
You're right.
It was pretty widely accepted by the whole entire group. I mean, we kind of into
the 35.
No, yeah.
So I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I just want you to know what will happen.
I get it.
And I can say by way of this process that to the concern of gaming, that the rule is in place to mitigate against the risk of gaming. And that's what they want. So whatever
exactly
you
what they
decide is
asked
going to work, it will. It's just whether or not what you are.
I just want to make sure. I think you know that. I just want to make sure.
Do we not have consensus to move back to the 40?
Yeah, I think we're good.
So I think we're hashing something that doesn't need to be hashed. Okay.
Let's move it to 45 and 75.
Here's the other shoe that has to drop. So the other concern was from Natalie and from Amy was that the state auditor would come down and review their work to see if the schools that were qualified fit statute and board rule. Now, if we have some schools that don't meet the 45-minute rule, you have an audit finding because you're now distributing funds to a school that's ineligible.
Because there's 2 other options to qualify for the
But if
program.
that school was qualified under that provision, I'm not looking for safe harbor here. It's like if you went under that provision and you failed, there's an audit finding to the state office.
Who are they gonna
They're
prove?
distributing money that they shouldn't be.
They gonna go ride the bus?
Well,
Come ride the bus.
Back to your point, Carrie, you said they don't want the gaming. Go back to 45, but it will cause some of us to try. I mean, we'll try to legitimate. I don't know if I like the word gaming.
Oh, no, I'm not, yeah.
We're gonna.
I'm just letting you know what they told me.
Right.
That's all I'm doing here.
You'll have to justify it.
Right.
But is there enough information in the board rule to know how to measure this 45 minutes? We've already debated here for a second, is it from the residents to the school, or is it between the schools?
And I've had a few board members that have said they would support if the group recommended it, more specificity on how to do that for future iterations of staff here.
And for a third party who
Or a third party, an auditor.
Any of this
Yeah.
conversation to come in and say, oh, this is how you say you do your business, but these are the results of your business.
Maybe we need to add something that says, instead of 45 minutes, including bus stops and.
It says bus travel. I mean, one-way bus travel.
Pretty clear.
That's pretty clear in my
It
mind.
should include bus stops and all the things that would be necessary.
And Todd, may I speak? The audit finding that did occur had to do with the outdated nature of the actual regressions, and that wasn't replicable. And trying to use more current data. I have not heard of an audit finding based on schools not qualifying under certain criteria. Not saying it can't happen. Your point is well taken. But yeah, I don't know if we need to shore that up to try to prevent audit finding. I haven't seen that happen.
So if we're saying it's travel time, using Google isn't the appropriate tool.
If Google shows an hour, then it would count, but if Google shows 35 minutes, then that's not the right tool.
I think it gives you a baseline, well, then you
Give a
can,
bigger concept of
you can
travel
jump.
time than point A, point B, speed limit.
Right.
You know, that's not.
So for instance, like when I turn in my application, I've got Sherm Elementary, who we have to send in. I think if I Google it, it's like 39 minutes. So I send in the Google map, it shows 39 minutes. I type up a paragraph saying there's no way on a bus with bus stops and this is going to go over 45 minutes. Any auditor is going to look at that and go, yeah, that's pretty damn reasonable. Pass.
Yeah.
I
Is
don't
there one to
see.
put on line 33 after bus travel, including routine bus stops?
Once you start that, there's a lot of factors.
Yeah, there's other.
There's everything from type of road.
Train, tracks.
So when you're
Well,
coming up over the mountain pass
Discretion to include what you
from
want.
Dugway,
That way you would.
it's not just speed, but it's number. There's like 150 curves on that little road there.
As long as the state board has cover on that, then, so I think we're okay with the measurement.
I just don't see it being an auditor issue.
Does the state board have the cover it needs for how it's being implemented?
Karen, how would you answer that question?
What was the question?
And, do we have cover? Do you feel like you could apply, given the wording on this, you're the one that's doing it, right? Screening these usually. Could you apply this and say, you know, it's reasonable, like Chad's point, that, you know, it meets the criteria?
So
We put it in so that
what
there
we have
wouldn't
in
be this
place right
confusion,
now
so that there
is,
would be some buffer. That's
I
why
am
it was put in.
checking to make sure that the paperwork has been submitted on time, and that there are
So what do you think?
pieces of documentation to defend the eligibility. Part that I have involved in
As
proving, looking at that.
NESS schools more on the
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is
other criteria of
maybe
56.
the standardization of
53,
sort of
54.
defining what we mean by transportation time, or we know what ADM is, that's pretty clear cut.
That's easy.
Transportation time and consolidation. If we could standardize some of those eligibility requirements so that everybody is kind of on the same music in terms of what information they're submitting.
Right.
I think that would help our decision makers how to approve schools. And for me, it would make it easier just because I check off and make sure that all the documentation is in place for the decision makers to make their determinations. But one thing I just wanted to bring up too, it will also help us for audits. It will also help us for tracking tracking NESS schools over time in terms of what has been improved and what has changed. Right now, I think at board rule, it talks about how the superintendent, what was that? I saw it's like they will measure year to year, or the superintendent shall annually, this is line 51, shall annually compare the school's ADM to the school's projected ADM to determine increases or decreases in enrollment. It goes on further to talk about over time, annually, looking at change. And I'm just saying that, there is also on line 56, the superintendent determines that consolidation may result in undesirable social culture. I think it would be nice to be able to have some sort of standardized application process to track over time too.
Yeah, either the definitions or somewhere else. Is that what you're saying?
And that was this C, the superintendent determines the consolidation and all that kind of stuff under line 56 is the exact reason that I made the recommendation that you have one superintendent that says, yep, this is a NESS school because of, I think that these things are in place. And then 2 years later, you have a new superintendent. They say, nope, I don't agree with it. So therefore, you're now not a NESS school, and it has a very significant negative impact on the financial situation of a school district. That's why I'm saying, that's why I was lobbying for, once you're in a school, you're in a school until such time as you grow out of it. And that way, we wouldn't have to go through this over and over and over and have Scott justify to a brand new superintendent some of the issues that he had to several years ago with the old superintendent. Just about.
Boy, I agree with that. If there's any way we could shore that up.
Yes, you can do it by way of the rule.
It's easy. It's just that there's already one that's a rule 4 years. It's under line 97. That's where it is. 97 through 103.
You simply say shall remain.
Yeah, a school that is, shall apply. So I'm just saying, if you're a new school and you want to go in, you're going to use the application process. If you're an existing NESS school, unless your ADM increases above the maximums there, you're still in that school.
Existing NESS schools exit when their ADM reaches
if
it exceeds these levels.
And if they're growing, their funding level goes down every year anyway, because that's what the regression curve does.
Right.
I think the mileage was just an attempt to make it a little for existing schools. I don't think it was designed to have a run on the number of schools. But
it was to show that it was remote. We were that far away.
But with those kind of assurances, I think we would be fine.
I think there's, just thinking back at your point about the new school, now that I've had time to digest that. So we do a grandfather clause and everybody's grandfathered in, and then, for some hypothetical reason, somebody decides to game the system and build a school right next to, I don't know that this would happen, but you have a middle school and you build another one. So they're going to be qualified forever because they're not going to grow out of ADM, even though they've got a school right next to them.
Move some of the kids over to the other school to
so consolidation is still. I think we can talk about that happening. I just don't see that it ever would happen because there's real dollars that have to be spent. So
charters would be the only ones.
The charters aren't necessarily existent.
They would be the only ones that would come in and put another school.
You can have a school that's elementary, and you have one that's secondary, and a wise decision might be to have a K-12 facility.
Right.
But you already have these two schools as NESS schools, and if you brought them together, you would lose the NESS status. So you have a financial disincentive to consolidate where the idea is, where consolidation makes sense, you should do that. So it's a very real scenario where you will consciously not consolidate when you could.
Yeah, and that already exists. That scenario already.
Exactly. So that we want to replicate it by grandfathering. Those are the things that are giving people heartburn.
Yeah.
That's gaming it as far as others are concerned. We might look at it differently, but that's a game. I'm choosing to hold on to something that's less efficient to get more money.
So you could.
I don't agree.
So can you grandfather it by saying, you're grandfathered in unless you grow out of it, or you no longer meet the maximum consolidation standard rule. So you've got two. I mean, yeah, if you grow out of the ADM, but if you build another school, then you're going to have to build it in a manner that you're still meeting that.
You're going to have to,
Yeah.
you'll have to re-justify the maximum capacity at that point.
I just wanted to bring up what the statute says about applications. To your point, it says this is, again, this is 53F 304, paragraph 2. And so, upon application by a local school board, the state board shall, in consultation with the local school board, classify schools in the school district as necessarily existing small schools in accordance with this subsection and state board rules adopted under subsection 3. And then it says an application must be submitted to the state board before April 2nd, and the state board must report a decision to the local school board before June 2nd. So
they never say anything about it going away or it's only good for so many years or anything like that.
And that's the entirety of what the statute says. So I guess my question is that sufficient flexibility to do what you're saying?
That's the initial application.
Well, not necessarily.
Well, and that's just the question.
Formula, that's a great question. It's not that you're applying it.
Well, we haven't done that ever.
I don't
It's
know.
always been a 2
Is it worth the battle? But
Probably
have to apply.
I mean, if you read that strictly, I think what you're doing with certifying the off years probably wouldn't qualify. But I think that you could probably read like you're saying and just say that's when the initial application has to be submitted. And I think that's perfectly justifiable.
It's great to have all kinds of programs at risk. Hey, I submit my state plan.
No,
It's good forever.
I agree that
That's you don't see that concept anywhere in any other funding.
Oh, you know.
I completely agree with Bruce that, I mean, once you're in S school, it's pretty hard to not be in S school any longer. But the application process isn't a burden either. It's not like it's that much work.
Mm-hmm. I just have the secretary do it in my office.
So how big of a deal is it?
Yeah, on our end, it's not that big. I'm not speaking for Karen.
You have two parties to this review.
Yeah.
I mean, as much detail as we can get, that's concrete and supportive of NESS and therefore supportive of the districts that have NESS, we'd like.
To me, every 4 years is reasonable.
Okay.
But you guys are the ones who do it, so.
I don't have a problem with that.
And that's reasonable for us too. I don't think you get any board members that would resist.
Huh?
Does it apply to the statute?
Every 4
That's board rule.
Yeah, we haven't gone there. There's 96, lines 96 through 103 talk about that. And you'd at least have to certify by April 2nd that nothing's changed.
Right.
So I think that would fulfill that. And then,
To me, you already got it.
and so it does reduce it a little bit. My question was to eliminate that requirement. Does that go contrary to the statute? I think there's a reasonable argument to say yes.
Yeah, I would agree. You would get plenty of questions about that issue, by legislators. For
I
sure.
don't. I really don't. I don't. It just
Well, and then going back to the time requirements, you would bypass a lot of questions if you don't reduce those time requirements. That there is, but at the same time, we don't want to disqualify existing schools. So, but that was the specific question I got
Well,
from.
why don't you check with the folks out there prior to next meeting?
Yeah.
Would you be okay with that, you guys?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we can do that.
And just find out if is that, Scott, that way you could, let's, I mean, if it's a great big issue, we'll bring it back and say, no, 35 is what we meant, and here are the reasons why.
Yeah.
Is that okay, Scott, if they do that?
Yeah.
Because I think it would, that at least then gives the body a chance, Todd, that gives the body a chance to respond to that issue. Then coming back here, is there a need to put it in definition? I don't know if that's right or wrong, but that's a question I think you guys should ask. Okay? About what does time mean? That's the question you're asking. That's the question others might be asking. I think that question may come up by...
Well,
did Ben ever ask that question when he was here?
I don't recall that So, I mean, he'll be at the next meeting. I'm sure we can bring it back up, but between now and the next meeting, if they can do,
You guys can just check on that issue.
Yeah, just check on it.
I will say when I shared this draft with Ben Leishman, the question that he came back was that will there be additional NESS schools with the transportation requirement changes? It was specifically with the transportation requirement changes. So, I can assure you that will come up.
Yeah. It will come up.
But regardless of what we do, from our standpoint, we have to estimate the fiscal impact for the rule change. So we would need to have that analysis done by the NESS districts anyways.
Yeah, you need to hear that.
So we would need to say, we would anticipate these would be our NESS schools under the rule changes. And if there's no change, that makes the fiscal impact statement very easy. But we'd have to know what that would be. And then if there's another district that's not a NESS district that kind of comes out of left field, those are harder to quantify. But at least looking back and saying your existing NESS schools, would there be any change with whatever rule changes are going to the board? That's what we need to know. I need to know when I'm writing a fiscal impact statement.
So the fiscal impact would be total dollars in the pot, right? Because if new schools coming on wouldn't affect the fiscal, there wouldn't be a fiscal impact.
Well, it would depend on how it was done, whether it was new appropriations to cover those schools or a redistribution of
That's when the time issue can matter.
At this point, the most probable would be that you would have less carryover distributed to the
Correct.
existing schools and not necessarily an additional.
Yeah, I think that's right. There he is.
Go ahead.
Is that you, D?
D, are you trying to comment?
Uh-oh.
Well, it seems like we're all somewhat in agreement with the original language, but I can send out an email to all the NESS schools and get everybody's vibe, and we can come back with confirmation of that next meeting.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. So the three that I hear so far as follow-ups are how to define maximum student capacity and how to approach that issue. What should the transportation amounts or time amounts be? And then does there need to be any additional clarification on how to measure the transportation requirements? Yes or no? That's still an outstanding question. Those are the three that I've heard.
What was the first one? Sorry.
Maximum student capacity. How should that be defined, if at all? That's the question. Because I heard lots of some significant issues with referring to this section. That's fine. How would we define it? That's a follow-up. Is that fair?
You guys?
I think that one's tough because there's a lot of local decision-making that goes into that capacity.
Well, and that's why maybe there's a way to define it that gives sufficient flexibility.
That's where I think you need to ask out there about that and see if there are other ideas. Because Tom brought up why it's complicated. There may be other things we're not even thinking about.
And that's why it might be better, even in that case, to define it more generally so that it's not inferred later more narrowly.
Yeah.
And that's why we just would like to get feedback between now and the next meeting on how that should be approached. Do we want to finish up on, I think the last thing we need to cover are the application pieces. That is the new language 96 through 103. And this was just trying to put into rule language the recommendation number 2, I believe. Yes. Do you want to go over that?
So the idea there, we've talked about this a little bit already, is that you apply once every 4 years. Then the years 2, 3, and 4, you basically would sign a form that says nothing's changed and submit that by April 2nd. So that's what we've added. We'll extra line at the end to kind of outline that process.
Pretty close to what I want, Bruce, when I go.
Well, I just If that's the case, let's talk about what's 4 years mean? Why every 4? Is there
We just put that in because that was the recommendation
I know,
here.
but I think I just want to bring it up again because I think
that's what Jamie would go to. So
yeah, that
that's-
was the
and our
maximum.
Jamie's like, I would be good with 4 years. so.
Because there's accountability in the system.
That's the reason.
It's not once and done. It's, check in with us on it.
I think it's pretty
Are you okay
reasonable.
with it?
I'm fine with that.
Okay. As long as I can just photocopy what I did last time,
Just change the date.
see what I basically did. That's what I'm saying. It's one of those exercises in futility, but hey, whatever.
So you get caught.
No, it's accurate.
And from our standpoint, I think it's just like 1 or 2 that come out of the whole pot of NESS schools. Yeah. Question from Duchesne? Was that you, D?
So I'll have Pat circulate the updated draft here. I've made the changes we've talked about, and you can look at those presumably before the next meeting, and if we have additional changes, we can look at those then.
So at the risk of prolonging the meeting, can I go back to lines 41 to 44? You can say no and just shut me up now.
Absolutely.
Instead of going down the path of trying to define maximum student capacity, what if you just restored the first line and delete the rest? So it would read, the school is in a district which has been consolidated to the maximum extent possible. Stop. That's the end. And we don't get caught up with this additional complications of trying to figure out across district boundaries and other issues, and we'll just stick with the original idea that was there, which is have you consolidated to the maximum possible.
So does that?
And you defend yourself as to why you think you have done your work to the maximum.
So does that remove it out of the definitions then? We don't have to define.
We would be able to remove the definition. Probably. It's existing
Because if
language.
we never had an issue with what maximum was before, why introduce that as a new problem? Just stick with the term that was there and get rid of the part that was confounding, which was this across district boundary issue of did across boundaries do you consolidate well? Well, we don't want to have that conversation. We want to consolidate within our district, not across boundaries. So get rid of that language and just stick with the original intent is have you maximized your capacity.
So that would eliminate the definition, because that's probably my biggest concern with it as it is, this change in definition. I'm not sure, even though early enrollment or the maximum capacity is defined in 53G6 401, I don't think it's for the same purpose. And
It's
so
not.
It's not.
Definitely it's not.
So because it's not for the same purpose, it doesn't make sense.
School choice.
If there was a definition there that made sense to bring over, great. But I don't know whether it's so that'd be a concern for me. And if we need to define maximum student capacity, maybe we need to come up with a definition for this program.
I'm trying to avoid it altogether. Let's open that can of worms. Let's just stick with the original intent, consolidate to the maximum extent possible. I'm sure we can debate what that means, but it sounds like that has all kinds of rationale as to.
Scott just explained what it meant in Tooele. And you guys all have a reason of what it means in your own districts.
Unless this was a problem area, don't touch it.
Right. Again, we were just trying to take these recommendations, how they were written, and who knows why, but it sounds like that's still it gets to the intent of that recommendation, and it would sidestep a number of issues.
What do you think, guys?
I agree with that.
I agree with that, as long as number 2 goes out as a definition.
It's too hard to define.
Well, it's being referenced back to a definition that has nothing to do with NESS schools. Like nothing to do with it.
But that's not a problem in and of itself. It's just, for lack of a definition, that was one.
To me, the content.
But it's going to be harder to.
I understand. Well, I agree with that. But I understand. But also, my point is the context there does matter.
Sure.
To me, it does matter whether it's about school choice or whether it's about necessarily existing small schools.
Right. Well, and that was we were looking and we found worse definitions, but that was right. That was the best one we could come up with, which isn't saying much. So you're saying right.
Get rid of the whole section.
So striking 19 and 20, which is the maximum. Oh, that's me. Sorry. Maximum student capacity line.
Dave needs to turn his
Speaker off.
turn your speaker off, Dave. Turn your mic off.
And then rewrite lines 42 through 45 to simply keep the existing language, the school as a district which has been consolidated to the maximum extent possible, and then strike the remaining existing language and no additional language.
Then the burden is on the board, the local board, if it gets in an audit or whatever, if that happens, to prove that they've done that.
Yeah.
Frankly, that's where the accountability should lie.
Because these are local factors that are very different.
If you can't do that, then you have to come to the super.
Which would
Been good for 4 years.
And how often?
Or until a new superintendent.
Every couple of years.
Ben, are we good there?
Yeah, I've got it.
Okay. Any other discussion points on the draft rule change? We will. So if members of the work group can go back and address, now we only have the transportation questions remaining, which is great. And then we will share as soon as we can a new updated draft, which we'll discuss in the following meeting. And then all the feedback that we'll consolidate the feedback and discuss those and any additional changes in the following meeting. Scott, any other pieces for item 4? Okay, great. The last piece we wanted to discuss was the timeline and process to put into effect long-term recommendation 1, which is updating the regressions with current or alternative regressions using current data, which
I define long-term as like 25 years.
Is that how many years you got left?
2.5 years.
well, looking how far into retirement. Who's the youngest BA?
That's why I say 25, 30 years on it.
That's right. That's right. Well, and so I wanted to put up just a proposed timeline. If you read the report, it's inferred that will happen by the end of this year, which, because of staff changes and all these things, that's not realistic to do, because we would have to collect a fair amount of data and make sure and go through scenarios and all of that during session. So can we bring that up? Okay, so this was I just need to put something on the board so that it can get shot with holes.
So in all seriousness, can that long-term recommendation be relitigated? Can we talk about that?
Yeah, and that's part.
I don't know if that's a next meeting thing. Or...
This is the placeholder for that, and maybe, what we'd want to know is, again, the purpose of this meeting was to put in effect these recommendations, or come to a consensus on how to do that. And so there was the audit finding that those regressions cannot be replicated. And so being able to update the regressions with current data is the intent. And now that we are reporting school level expenditures, that may be more feasible. But
let me ask you a question. In one of our meetings, Jamie, if I recall, reported that the Legislative Fiscal Analyst's Office and I think it was the Governor's Office of Planning and Budget were going to try and come up with some suggested replicated regression formulas. However, there were still issues as to what those regression formulas, the grade levels and grade bands and whatever that we were looking at there. Has any of that been done to this point, or are we're basically right where we were at? Okay, because that that drives your timeline significantly.
Absolutely.
So, well, yeah, so now we're probably looking at 2022 or 2021, right?
Right. So
2021.
So this was a timeline just to get your feedback, and we would like to say, if we really don't, because there was the question, do you need to have a bill for statutory changes? And for me, the need for statutory changes would be if you change the categories of those of the student limits, if there was a new regression, how that would look. And we are not ready for that for this legislative session. So this was a proposal to work on it over the next year. Once we get this rule change, the last thing that we really have to do is to come to a consensus on regressions.
I think one of the things that we've talked about as business administrators is it feels like that just because it can't be replicated, that it's wrong. Which is we don't concur with that thinking. We feel like it ain't broken, don't fix it. It works. It does what we've done. We need to, and given the fact that we've now we're changing the board rule to take the all of the money, and distribute it in the current year. We're just afraid that we're going to spend a huge amount of time and effort. It's going to redistribute funding significantly, which would be problematic, and that So can we rather than rebuilding those curves, just revisit them and say, is it doing what we want to do, rather than trying because they're old doesn't mean they're wrong.
I think you've got some school configurations that don't fit the statutory categories.
Okay.
So there's something has to be done. I don't know how extensive, but have some scenarios.
For example, K-12, K-9, those are not there.
Unless you divide them and you pigeonhole them into a couple combinations.
Right. You have to kind of make it fit.
Serious curve, because you're steep end of both schools' curves. You're getting more money than you would if you actually created a scenario for that grade configuration. So there are some questions.
So currently, though, we're doing that and distributing money that way. So whatever you do, if you create a new curve for those grade configurations, it may have a significant negative impact on a district. So I think
unless you tweak them to make it work.
Yeah.
All I'm suggesting is we have the famous phrase, we need to update statute to match. You'll hear that as a defense quite often on legislation that moves forward. Is that where we are? Is that the boat we're in? Do we have some practice that just needs to be in code? Because I don't think the rule is sufficient to cover some of the scenarios we have.
No.
Because they're in the statute. I mean, you have to work with
You're saying statute has to change
to accommodate some of the configurations.
Changes that we have right now.
Yeah.
Okay. So assuming the statute changes, then the regressive formula then reflect those changes, the current one.
Yeah, so we just have to be really brilliant so that Bruce's concern doesn't become a reality.
So
someone comes out short as we get them into the right pigeonhole.
Jake, so how are we dealing with, say we have a K-12 school right now.
Yep.
So it really is, you're breaking it into two pieces, correct at this point? And then
strictly related to
from
NESS?
a funding perspective, yes. Say you had a K-12 school, something, and I know we've got configurations that don't strictly fit what the statute and the board rules say right now that you're dealing with.
Right.
And I just remember that's what Jamie had said, that they had taken and said, okay, we're going to break it into an elementary and a secondary school, and we use the regression curves for each of those, and then that's how they're funded.
Yeah, we have a few different breakouts. 1 and 2 year secondary, 3 year secondary, 4 year secondary, 6 year secondary, and elementary. Those are the
right. And so we're having to kind of jury the K-12 or other configurations.
That was Todd's point.
But there's a lot of configurations that could be, maybe some of them we don't have today too.
Right.
So do we have to run 20 regression curves? I mean,
Well,
that's.
my question was, does the statute need to change to reflect those things, or do we have to change the regression curve to reflect those things?
Both.
Probably both.
That's my understanding. It's probably both. But I'm also, so a couple things just for our information. This is what statute says about the regression curves. The state, okay. Additional weighted pupil units for schools classified as NESS schools shall be computed using regression formulas adopted by the state board. And then it says the regression formulas establish the following maximum sizes, but it doesn't actually say how those regressions, it's very broad.
It is so broad that the current formula might fit that. It does fit that, but it doesn't fit other elements that we do right now. How we apply the formula. How we apply the formula.
Part of the problem was that additional funding would come in, and it wouldn't necessarily come out because the factors of the regression didn't draw all the money available. It did its own separate math, and two came together and were the right dollar amount. Hallelujah. If it came out short, then there was actually a proration methodology, and if you came out with extra, you had carryover.
Now we're saying we're going to distribute the carryover. So we're taking care of that part.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm saying? Is the formula doing what it was intended to do? That's what I hear repeatedly from the BAs. It's doing what it was intended to do.
There's not a BA receiving NESS that would tell you different.
So I'll go to my question again. Why does the regression formula need to change if it's doing what it was intended to do?
And my answer, Terry, to that is this legislative or the state auditor report. Let me read that. That says, we found USB has not evaluated or updated the regression formula for NESS since 2011 and has not developed written procedures detailing the regression formula and the factors included in the formula. Additionally, we found USB as duplicate. Okay, that was it for NESS.
So is that the internal auditor here, or is that the external?
That's the
state auditor.
So
yes, the state auditor.
What did he say? That they had not evaluated, right? Is that
let me read it again. Yeah, so this is the state auditor.
Right.
We found USB has not evaluated or updated the regression formula for necessarily existent small schools since 2011 and has not developed written procedures detailing the regression formula and the factors included in the formula.
Okay, all right. So I'm hearing there,
Where's it required to do
this
that?
organization here is not evaluated it.
Which we're doing now.
Which we're doing right now.
So this is proof of
Or
purchase.
updated, yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Updated, evaluate or updated. Updated means only if necessary.
right.
Okay.
By way of the evaluation.
Yep.
I'm assuming that's correct. Okay.
It is.
And then the second piece was?
Documenting. Develop written procedures detailing the regression formula and the factors included in the formula.
For staff, for who?
So here's the thing. Here's the thing where we're at then with this, right? Is that there are advocates, board members that would like to see the formula in the rule. You know, and I don't know.
Whoa.
Yeah. Well, or how we calculate it.
They can use Jonathan Wall's formula he uses for the cap limit. Have you seen it?
But anything with John's name in front of it.
In the law.
I want to hear what Scott has to say.
Yeah.
Finish
So
this is important for me. Maybe not you guys.
Because here's what's going on as well is we have some policy writers coming in. They're a third-party contracted firm that we could set up a procedurals manual for calculating the regression formula, or get it into the rules so that no one can mess with the actual formula. Because even if you do it in the procedure, without doing this, right?
Yeah.
So if we're continually going to be told that, we're not evaluating and, changing based on the evaluation, then, we want to have it someplace where, hey, based on the evaluation we did in 2019 with business administrators, here's where it is. Some, again, would say that the best place for it is the rule because Otherwise, the risk is that staff can manipulate the formula here. Or, as we tread or do different things that way, then, where else would it be to where a staff member couldn't change it? Because what was not said in this audit report is that there was concerns that just waiver after waiver was being issued and there was really no rhyme or reason to, saying, well, you don't qualify, or, the formula doesn't allow for you to come off of it when you're ADM, et cetera, et cetera. So,
okay, so if we ever had a third party, so the state auditor did not evaluate the formula?
No.
Okay, so we've never had,
as far as I know, no.
We've never had anybody evaluate the formula for its effectiveness. That's my question. Why? Why, Scott?
I don't know. I really can't answer. That's a good question.
Are you telling me there aren't mathematicians here, the University of Utah, that can't do it?
Effectiveness isn't the answer you're looking for, though.
Accuracy.
It's not even a question of accuracy. It's consistency.
Okay, you put the right words in there. That's the question I want to know.
So, to Scott's question, my preference.
I'm sorry, I'm asking a question. I have to ask it because I'm going to get asked by legislators.
And my preference is not to put a formula into the rule, but to put the factors in that need to be used in the regression formula. Because you're going to have to tweak it and manipulate it and work it. I'm using nasty words here, but there's a reality to math formulas that you have to tweak them every year. Not nefariously or to benefit someone or anything. But tell us what the factors, it's what legislation usually does. They'll tell us the factors that need to be considered, and then they hand it off to the board.
So Todd, I think I'm saying the same thing. That's what the BAs are saying.
Well, I'm trying to reflect on Scott's question, which is, let's not get the hard formula written into the rule. Just tell us the factors that will govern us. Because we've had debates. Is it ADM? Is it square footage? How far down the regression formula does the ADM matter? It's all those kinds of things. Which gets to the question of effective or efficient are the dollars getting to the settings that we need the dollars to get to? And the VAs are saying, hey, the current formulas are doing that.
That's what I'm hearing repeatedly, consistently.
So we just need to.
But we haven't been able to defend it up there well enough yet. That's why this process.
Because we can't explain the factors that are being used in the regression.
So what we've been talking about today are factors.
I believe so. That's potentially.
Potentially, yeah. I believe so.
Sorry for my
Terry, what we have on our standpoint is we have these regression curves that were calculated, maybe 2011, maybe before. For a school this size, they qualify for these many WPUs. We don't know what factors went in to calculate this additional cost. And that's
what you can't replicate.
And that's what we cannot replicate.
All right.
And we don't know why it's this amount for this size school, this amount for this size school, and it tapers off. We do know it tapers off because that was the requirement. So let me read to you one more thing, and we can share this with the whole group. Again, these are the recommendations from the state auditor. We recommend USBE 1, document the process and the factors considered in the regression formula. It doesn't say where we need to document that. Right. It could be, but we just couldn't do it based on the calculations we have. We have these calculations, but we don't know what fed into those original calculations. Right. And then evaluate, and this is important too, evaluate and update the process and factors as considered necessary. And then they add at least once every 5 years.
What's the state auditor's basis for these recommendations? Is it statutory that all codes get reviewed and looked at and analyzed? What's their basis for recommendation?
Triggered by some kind of a not long tip in that we're sending money out, knowing that.
I'm gonna go back to meetings that I was in when Martel Menlove was here. This was probably 7, maybe even 10 years ago, where Pat Wilson was the one that was the business administrator worked with a couple of other people here at the state board office.
Was Rob involved too?
I think it might have been, but I know what they did is they went and looked at the amount of funding that was received by various schools that met specific criteria, and they plotted them. but you didn't see a straight, even curve. Not at all.
No, you wouldn't.
But they did the best fit that they could by tweaking factors to get a curve that would fit within the points that they had looked at.
And that's
on a
why
per
it can't be
student.
replicated right there.
The other issue that they looked at was how much more money was needed to have a more similar educational environment or opportunity for these students, because they compared a full size, like for example, high school with all the opportunities that students had there, and then looked at one of the small rural high schools and said, you can't even come close to having a student have those opportunities. And so there were some factors that were taken into account there. So replicating this is not going to be an easy process, especially if it's someone who is not real specifically involved in the education process. If I was somebody who was just a statistician and I walked in and went, how can I do this? Because there were so many factors that were educationally based and outcome based that were taken into account in the overall. I mean, Terry, you know, as a former superintendent, that there's a big gap between a small school and a big one in opportunities. And how do you you almost have to do look at it and say, well, let's do an analysis that's not needs based. It's just what is needed to make this thing happen. And I know the legislature hates to go there, but that's kind of what you have to go to say, how do I get these more comparable? That's the whole purpose of the funding.
Right.
So I'm defending what I'm hearing from people, and I've heard this response before, and I'm hearing it again. So now I'm going to say to everybody here, what I'm feeling is that what we have to do then is in the definition, as we move forward with looking at this regression formula, you guys have got to understand it very clear. You know, whatever tweaks are going on are going to have to be such that you're going to be comfortable with, if they're going to be any. Because I think there's an expectation that there's going to be tweaks. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Okay? And so I'm defending that we shouldn't do that, but I'm telling you guys all directly here that the hard reality is, I think the auditor, the chairs, and others, Ben Leishman, are expecting a change here.
Okay.
So
Terry,
I don't know what we do about that.
Let me go take that one step farther, because you're representing the school districts and the superintendents. Okay, if you have a finite amount of money, which we have, and you tweak, what's going to happen?
There'll be winners and losers.
You're going to have redistribution.
Yeah.
And it could be very substantial redistribution. And that causes problems because we've already built our system around a funding source. And so if all of a sudden, as a district, I lose $400,000 or $500,000 in a small school district like mine,
well, it matters a ton.
I am going to have to lay off teachers.
And there are things, sometimes the legislature will do like a hold harmless period where even if
I understand that.
tweaks are made, then you have time to make adjustments.
So the reason I'm bringing up this hard conversation,
I agree.
because it is the hard conversation, and at some point we better get to that.
Yeah, it's just funny. The adjustment would be cutting from a rural school programs that they need just to get on par with a non-rural school.
Yeah, it doesn't.
So the educational equity is just getting worse by making these tweaks.
Yeah,
that's
we're more
hideous.
in a refinement mode than a reconstruction.
Well, that's what I hope. That's why I'm asking these questions. I'd rather see it if can we refine what we have.
That's why I brought up
not redo what we have.
What was the?
I don't know,
Terry. That's why I brought up what was the direction of the past meetings, was that the LFA and somebody from the governor's office would go and be an economist or a statistician and come in and redraw these curves, who doesn't understand education, and all of a sudden those are going to become what we're at. We're not tweaking in that case. We're totally redefining.
And for whatever reason that didn't happen. So maybe
we step back and tweak.
Right. We have as long as we can have some curves that can be explainable and replicable with updated data, that gets to the intent of the auditor finding.
Meaning we could use our current formula, plot it in such a way, I mean, whatever the factors are, and defend it. That's what you're saying or not?
No, I'm not saying that, because we would have to have a curve that we can defend, saying maybe based on different costs between schools, this is why the curve looks like this, and it has to be a regression based on actual cost data. It can't, but we can figure out what those factors are to at least get close. But the question that I wouldn't be able to answer is, have you addressed the audit findings? And if we just take a curve that we can't replicate and change it, then we're still having a curve that we can't replicate.
Same problem.
And so we would need to take the data. So this is why I went to the timeline that we talked about, or that we wanted to talk about, which was after these first few meetings and we get the rule revisions, then starting in the spring and summer, we can look at some regressions and figure out, okay, here are multiple scenarios based on current data, and have you actually be able to look at and say, okay, these are the cost data for my schools, and then we can figure out, okay, what is our methodology, and we can change it.
2020.
And so that wouldn't be for this legislative session; it would be for the following legislative session, and that would give us a year to work on that. And I know it would still be a lot of work, but then at least we can address that.
Let's ask one more question then. Who is going to have the responsibility and has the mathematical acumen to deal with rebuilding a regression curve that may or may not be different than the one we have now? I'm just saying, who are we going to have do that also understands education? Maybe it's that you have somebody that doesn't, they draw something and then we tweak it and whatever. Is that something that Jake does? Is that something that who
So can I answer that? So we do have an economist in our office who is most familiar with the current regressions, but she can't replicate these because she doesn't know what the factors are.
You know what she's talking about.
But Corey can't. She would be helping on the, and then we also have a lot of folks at data statistics to help us with that. But the thought would be that we would take the mathematics end, and then we would use available data and then have districts report the data that we do not have to run these regressions without any idea or without any pretense to saying this is the outcome we want, but just to say what would it look like, these different scenarios, and then we can compare and contrast.
So
and
can
do
we
some
then go
scenario
back
analysis.
to the information from the 2019 AFR, APR?
We could.
And use that, or are we going to try and use the 20? Because that's when we really had anticipated being on school-based reporting. Was FY20 data? Is that not wrong?
That's right.
I thought
that's
that
right.
It was
FY19 was the first.
Yeah, but it's kind of
but the requirement is
was 20. So until we get 20 data in,
right,
it would be really hard to go and plot to see how the curve fits.
So I'm gonna make this proposal. It's just like we did for school level reporting. Let's use 2019 now, right? Just to see, and then also use 2020 at that time it's available. Why not? Why not do both?
Look back and
look back, and at least we'd have, okay, so, and the other piece is it just doesn't have to be Corey or internally here. But what we need help with, right, we could contract for help if you guys want to. Or if there is other people out there that, when I say other people, like people you've come across in your careers, or that you know of at GOMB and or the LFA, and we could make that a subpart of this task force of having them do it with you, like you would meet with them and see what their progress is or not, or wait till they're done. It's such a time that you feel like, if we all want to put it just in the USB house, so to speak, we can. Or if we want to add, a third-party contractor person, we can. We have time to do an RFP, to at least they could come on board, for 2020. We could start 2019 internally, whatever, and that's, so thoughts on that? How do you guys want to proceed?
I just think we need to have somebody that can make it statistically make sense and can then put something in writing that would meet the criteria that the state officer was looking at. But I also am just asking that we don't throw our current curves out. Those could be one of the solutions that we end up back with when we're done.
Sure.
Because they have been working well for us, and we feel like
If you don't end it, it's going to be ugly.
that's the concern I have, is we just throw that out.
Say that.
So you don't end up back where we're at, it's going to be ugly, period.
Yeah, that's kind of it. So, can the current curve be thrown in there as an option? Or do we have to clearly defend all of the other? You don't think so?
This feels like NESS is getting a lot of undue.
No, and the reason why we can't consider it is because
have we done the same thing with LSA and extended day kindergarten and every other line item out there? No.
And I could throw them up there, but for example, the curve has a maximum for elementary of about 58 WPUs. So an additional WPUs, and I forget exactly where that is, like 80 students or something. Why is it that was the maximum additional cost for a school? I can't defend that from an analytical standpoint.
Unless you go back to faculty.
Right, but we can we can
want to go back.
Say that again.
There is a report that describes that. It exists.
Where?
I was on the NESS committee 5 years ago with Martel Menlove, and he produced it at that meeting.
Do you have that chat?
Well,
I might very well have
a documentation process that we need.
That might help you.
Right.
This many
That's fine.
ADM means this much WPU. That's probably not going to sit somewhere in a report, but the methodology will have been described.
Right.
That's the frustrating part.
Did you ever see a copy? I mean, you saw the copy, but you don't have a copy.
When I was here,
You were here.
I've looked in our folders and I couldn't find
See,
anything.
everybody's been saying this, and Pat.
It exists.
He's in Richfield right now. I texted him back and forth the other day. I mean, if we wanted to, he would probably come and talk to us.
And Bruce, if we can get to that point where we can document that, then yes. And then document the methodology, then
that's
absolutely.
That's why I don't want to say that we can't use that curve. Right?
Assuming we can.
Yet,
right. Assuming we can replicate the methodology, then maybe we can. But until we know those factors and how to actually get to that curve.
But there will be the pressure for updating it, which is,
right.
That was 20 years ago. That's what a cost structure looked like now. What does today's cost structure look like? And it's not that you're redoing the regression, you're updating it to the new cost profile.
Which fits the intent of the audit.
Which may be that you have more fixed costs than you had 20 years ago, or those fixed costs cost more, so you need the curve to be steeper in a certain way.
Right.
So, it's still the same factors.
Right.
And that's where if we can get to Pat's report, we can see the factors that they took into consideration, and we can revisit those.
Which my suggestion is we use the 2019 cost data, and then when we get it, the 2020 cost data to do just that.
In terms of time frame, we would have, in the fall of next year, we would have unaudited 2020 data that would change somewhat with the audit, but not much. And then by January or December, depending on when, we would have the audited 2020 data to rerun the regressions. And then before session. Now, but we could at least start scenario analysis with the 19 data to see even what this looks like. I don't know. But if it's going back and bringing Pat in and to say, okay, let's really dig into this formula.
Here's one thing and this is going back, and maybe I'm beating a dead horse, and I know that Chad brought it up as well. We're just moving money around among the poor of the poor.
Right.
That's the reality.
We're still not up to par with what a bigger school would be, even with the NESS.
So I'm concerned that we go into this, and if we're going to look at drawing the regression curves, which would redistribute funding, that the legislature needs to understand they may have to come up with some money for a while, so that there is, so that you're not.
That's why we have a budget request through the delegate assembly for 500,000. We got it last year, we got it this
I know,
year.
but that is just because we anticipate that we're still underfunded, but I'm saying somehow.
But no, that's this. Those are the same stories. We don't have a regression formula that we can forward to justify the $2 million that we think we need.
But what I'm saying is, you got $500,000 there, and if you move more than $500,000 around, it's not gonna hold anybody harmless. Though we go in with an understanding that there's got to be time to deal with these things, especially if there are significant shifts in monies from one district to
Are
another.
you really worried that there's going to be a significant shift?
Yes, I am.
I can tell you are.
I am.
You're saying you don't think that's going to happen. You guys are worried about the same thing.
I'm worried about it if we rebuild the curves. If we
And time to deal with it doesn't solve anything because the school's not going to change. So you're just ripping money away from that school who already doesn't have the programs of XYZ school.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of NESS, is to get these schools to have those same opportunities.
That's why we've done this.
But if your cost structure
ask
doesn't
for
support
500,
what you're
500,
currently
500.
doing, then what's the question? If you have the cost structure and we're trying to get the curve to fit your cost structure, there's no harm, no foul. It's not redistributing, it's justifying for those who are on the outside of the story. But if it turns out that, hey, your school only costs $1,200 per kid and not $1,300, okay, that begs a new question. I don't think we're going down the path of such a redistribution you guys are going to lose money. I think we're building a platform whereby we can justify these additional dollars we've asked for the last couple of years that has been given to us graciously, but without justification, other than they trust us to say we're not getting enough money. But they would like to know how to get it into the right places. Well, let's give them the tool to get it to the right places. I really don't. I have no concern that there's a redistribution program in effect here. We're going down every path that justifies how we spend our dollars right now today.
It's a justification program.
Well, the other thing we're going to have to be doing in this whole thing is building an adequacy analysis. Because really, the whole thing you're trying to do is say, what does it take to move from here to here? And the legislature, every time I've used the word adequacy, I've just freaked out. Because of what's happened in other states. But that's what we would have to be doing, is trying to say, what does it take to get to that point? And we're going to be defining not only what the curve looks like, how much we really need to get to the point where there's the equity there.
I would love the scenario that will, and I'm pretty sure this is how it will play out, that our costs and the regression formula can't even touch each other. And that's the gap that we need additional money.
The problem is you're only looking at our costs of these schools. You've got to take into account the costs associated with other schools.
Yeah, but Bruce, that's how it was developed in the first place.
Yeah,
now,
so
now if we're doing, so if this is an add-on program, if that's what you're describing, this, you get your basic WPU, and then it's an add-on on top. Those are the stories you have to start telling. But we haven't even told that story. We're just saying an S school needs this much money. It's not been an add-on conversation. It's been the total cost conversation.
And, you know, I'm fairly familiar with other states and adequacy studies and how fraught those are, because, you know, when you're trying to, you know, I could go down multiple states if you want to and talk about that. The good part is this is not that same thing. An adequacy study looks, you know, doesn't have a control group to compare to. We do. We have more, you know, larger school districts, and you have something a lot more concrete to compare to programmatically, and you can be able to quantify these are the things we can afford with existing funding, including NESS and per student, and you can quantify that. We can have a control group. When you're comparing what would be necessary to get X or Y level of performance, that's a much harder thing to do. And so since you're just quantifying NESS schools to another school, but you have to do it on a per student basis, on a programmatic basis, and that should be part of the analysis. And what if it may even show that the cost curves, like you're saying, are higher. And we're saying, you know, it may be that NESS needs an additional $10 million, And that's what it would, you'd want the analysis to drive the outcome, not the outcome to drive the analysis.
I agree with you, but I think you've got to say, what does a NESS school look like if it gets to the point where we want it to necessarily get to? What are not maybe the outcomes, but what are the opportunities that we're going to have in a NESS high school? And that, to me, is looking at what does it cost to do it. And I
right, and that's not exactly what an adequacy study does. And so it is similar enough that it may make some people squeamish, and I get where you're coming from. But to say that, if I had a student attending X high school on the Wasatch Front, and now, they go and attend a NESS school over here, what opportunities at that funding level are they not able to receive, and what is that differential? And that's the whole purpose of being able to rerun these, to be able to say, this is what we estimate would be the cost difference. There is a political decision after that to say, well, does the legislature appropriate additional funds? But right now, we can't really defend what those cost structures are because they are antiquated, even if the distribution is working out pretty well. That's the hard part, that maybe there's something where we can meet in the middle, but unless we have scenarios to look at, we're kind of arguing in the dark. I don't really know what that looks like until we actually run the numbers and see what that looks like.
It's just hard when you know that there's going to be redistribution and you don't know that there's going to be funding to make up for that, so that a school district doesn't have to make significant changes to
Well, we've been asking, so all of you, we've been asking for additional funding, as Todd has said, 500. We're on the third year of the 500.
And they've been granting it.
And they've been granting it. They've been granting it for two reasons. One, they believe there's a need there.
So are we arguing with ourselves, or are we arguing with the legislature? Because they've been giving the money.
They've been giving the money. The second thing is they want us to take a look. I'm pretty sure tied to that is they want us to take a look at all of this and make sure that everybody is comfortable with what's moving forward in the future. I think those are the two reasons why it's happening. So the BAs are going to have a hard conversation with each other and about where we're at on this and moving forward. We can stick this position we're in, only this and only this. I don't know where that's going to get us. Okay, the auditor, legislature, the LFA are saying we need something that at least can be replicated differently. So how do we do that, you guys? That's a question I'm asking you. We don't have to decide it right now. I don't know. They're suggesting next year we move forward with a process to get there. That's what they're suggesting. And we don't know what it means until we look at it. We don't know what it means until you start looking at it.
You're right.
I just hope we don't get back in the corner of trying to justify something that can't be justified. Why is the WPU valued at $3,500 today? There is no one in this room or even in the state of Utah
that can answer that question.
But we're kind of getting into that same mode here.
How much money was available? That's my point. NESS is getting undue attention. Let's go look at every other program. Let's go to this level at every other program.
We're here for that purpose, though. So I don't know what you guys want to do with this, but they're proposing a process for next year to study it.
I'm of the opinion we look at it, but I think at the same time, let's just not throw out the baby with the bathwater, is all I'm saying. Because
when do you have to report to the legislature?
That's where
So just the initial indication is it'll be early in the session. And then I'll have to go back, because we are requesting $500,000 for NESS funding, and they want us to update them on where we're at. So the risk is if we don't come forward and say, okay,
we're studying
this, and I present the audit report and say, we're still following up on this, right? The risk is they might say, well, if we do that, I think we'll be okay. If we don't, then the risk is they're going to say, well, we're not going to give you the $500,000 till you do, right? I mean, I think that's the risk, and I think that's fair from their standpoint because they have supported us over the last couple of years. But I also know what the risk is, and you've articulated it well, is that we might risk throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? That we could change the, and I agree with Chad, it's unfortunate, or, I'm not saying he said that, but, why aren't we looking at every other program? All I know is that somebody said that we didn't know what we were doing here, right? Natalie and Jamie got called on the carpet, and they said, we don't know how to answer your question.
It was not pleasant.
Right. We don't know how to answer that question. I don't have the cost factors. It is what it is. They didn't do it, intentionally or anything like that. But until we come at that, we risk that kind of, or that level of scrutiny. There's even talk of just saying, well, let's do away with NESS entirely. I'm not sure what they would do in that. But there is some of those indications, unless we go down this road, providing the details behind the curve.
Well, but you're also open, if I'm hearing it right, to Pat Wilson, maybe him or somebody.
Oh, yeah,
the factors all coming forward.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yes.
We don't mind replicating the existing result. I would really like that.
If we can get it, we ought to go that.
That's why earlier I said, I think we should, but if it is what it is, if we can't come up with the cost factors that are behind it, we're right back where we are. Which is, okay, then now you're going to have to create the cost factor, or not create, but use cost factors and create a new curve.
And you're saying you've seen it when you were here years ago.
Pat presented. I saw presented.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
so if somehow that can be found, that would help dramatically.
Yeah, if you find the document.
Yeah, I've been looking through all of Natalie's old stuff.
I did once, and I
think the best thing is to check. Go look in.
Well, I've got all his old files. So.
Whose stuff?
Do you?
Check.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay.
When I was here, it was in my office. When Martell was here, it was in his office. It was a pretty fluid document for a while because we had the same conversation. At that time, it was confirmed that we'd keep the regression. We just had to figure out how to update it because new dollars were coming through.
But at the time, you didn't have the school level data that was part of the AFR. That was reported. Am I correct?
Yeah, we had knowledge of what our costs were at the schools.
Right. But you don't have the statewide.
You didn't have the AFR.
You don't have the AFR data that we now
the BAs
have.
could go back and calculate.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
So they did. But it wasn't every school either. It was
a sample.
The sample of schools, mainly NESS schools, and they graphed it.
Well, there were non-NESS schools also, like Richfield High was part of it. It was a non-NESS school.
Because you need to compare, right? Yeah. Yep. So my main question, and it's okay if we need to come back, is what does the work group want to do in terms of a process for this? Because it would be great for Scott and others to have an answer to that question. At least this is the process going forward. We don't know what the outcome will be, but that's the question on what. Do we want to try to do this in a year? Does it take longer? Are we wanting to work on this over the summer and fall? Those are the questions that I have.
I don't think you can get this done by the session by any means, so it would have to be next, if we're going to keep going.
Which is what they're proposing.
Right. Which there's understanding and support for that due to the fact that we have treated 2 people within 4 months, and those happen to be very. Now we've got
kind of key.
And
there's no carryover.
Then there's no carryover.
I swear that's what brought this on.
Right.
Yeah, well,
yeah.
There's money, you guys claim you need money, it's not being distributed to you.
So,
obviously you don't need it.
So we have the staff.
My recommendation as far as who does it, if we're going to go into this replication, whatever, I think first of all we need to bring back whatever we can from the current formula, and maybe that's something we try and deal with next meeting. If that's, I don't know, it's just or in a future meeting.
Right. So coming out of this meeting, staff here will research and try to find that report.
But I think Chad does too, because he's in the same office.
Great.
And probably has
one or some of you reach out to Pat and ask to attend the next meeting.
Well, if not,
we need to attend. It's just someone can get hold of the document.
Okay, so you don't want him to. You don't have.
Not necessarily at this point.
Okay.
We're gonna look for a document.
Okay.
But
do you want him there, you guys?
But I think the other thing that we need to look at, is, from my perspective, is whomever is the statistician, mathematician, whoever is trying to put together the curves for the future, needs to have some educational background, or at least have somebody as a staff person working with them that does. Because otherwise, it's going to be nearly impossible for them to come up with something that makes any sense.
Well,
so
does Corey as the lead need that?
I just don't know.
Because I don't know anybody else. I
think Corey would be fine, but I think you've got to include some people that are at school level. She's never worked in a school.
Such as?
I don't know, whether it's you can get some VAs involved.
See what we can find. Well, no, we would.
It's us. It should be you. But I mean,
but she leads it.
Right, somebody's going to have to.
Good.
So I just think we need to find somebody. I'm just trying to say, these are the kinds of things that I think are important.
So Scott, leave Pat as a question mark.
Okay, got it.
Okay, they're going to check.
We'll still look for the report.
Yes.
Okay.
So between now and our next meeting, we'll look and see what we can find, and then we'll come back and have another discussion on what that process could or should look like. What kind of working group within the working group to start running these scenarios, who should be point for that. But we can start to answer those questions based on a little more homework on that. And then hopefully we can have some sort of timeline, but we'll see how the discussion goes next time. Does that work?
One other person I had to check with was Patty Murphy. She lives right next to me, and she was here at the state board office during that time frame, and I think she had some input in her. So she helped work with those curves. So I'll talk to her as well.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that sounds like a fair process.
Yeah. So we'll put it as a placeholder. We'll figure out what that needs to look like, and we may not even have final decisions on that, but it would be great for Scott and others to have some answers to say, we are in the process of doing this, have some confidence in us. That's the main concern that I have. Anything else, Scott?
No, I'm sorry. We're looking at what we think might have been the report, but it doesn't have cost factors in it.
Yeah. Okay. We'll keep digging, because we have been. We really appreciate all your time on that.
Just two follow-ups. Ben sent me an updated draft that I'll send to everybody, and then Chad, you are carrying the bulk of this. You're going to send an email to all NESS schools to get their comments on those 3 questions that Dale talked about, and also next
And transportation at this point.
Yeah, so the one about maximum student capacity does not have to be asked because we are bypassing that. So it's really about transportation.
Just the other 2, the time amounts and clarification on how to measure the transportation requirements.
Right. So are there schools on the margin, that where you need to change that? And then if you do change it, are there additional schools? That would be helpful.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
You got